Welcome to the fantasy audiobook. Get lost, you witch. Don't even think about letting me have a baby with you again. Chapter 21. The end of the story was once again beyond Pei Xinan's expectations. She had heard too many men's flattering words, but she found them boring and dull, not half as interesting as this story. Listening to the giggle of the little guy next to him, Pei Xinan's complexion unconsciously softened. Whether she wanted to admit it or not, in the few days since Li Qingming, Pei Zulu had laughed far more than when he was around her. Saying, "Baby, go to bed quickly," really coaxed the little guy to close his eyes and sleep, which Pei Xinan had never done before. It seemed that Li Qingming had a reassuring temperament, and she slept extremely comfortably that night. But when he opened his eyes the next day, Pei Xinan clenched his fists again. She was obviously lying on the outermost side, but now she was lying in Li Qingming's arms, pillowing on his arm. As for the latter's two hands, one was grasping her chest and the other was pinching her buttocks. Li Qingming. Oh, you woke up. Li Qingming, who was woken up by a shout, yawned. He was still a little sleepy and was too lazy to pay attention to the witch who seemed to be going crazy. "It's not my fault, you got into my arms yourself." Pei Xinan was lying on his side, with his black hair spread out in a beautiful arc. His face was cold and silent, but his cheeks were gradually turning pink. Just because, Li Qingming didn't know whether it was intentional or unintentional, but he grabbed it with both hands again. Li Qingming. A soft drink brought endless frost, and Li Qingming's remaining sleepiness disappeared in an instant. "Why are you making so much noise so early in the morning? Ha ha, look at your stinking look. Do you have the nerve to say that you are a righteous young swordsman?" Pei Xinan was a little crazy. Regardless of whether she took the initiative to get into Li Qingming's arms and let him hold her, she would only think it was Li Qingming's fault, let alone how dare he act so boldly. A good man never mentions his bravery. Li Qingming reluctantly gave her one last kiss before letting go. After losing all his cultivation, he lived a very relaxed and comfortable life, without having to worry about his demeanor at all. In the past, when he was high-spirited, he was just like the little boy in front of little girls. He had to take image and face into consideration. "How can I have any freedom now? Stop talking about me. When you thrust into my arms this morning, you still have the nerve to say that you are a demon witch." Li Qingming changed his position and lay down again. "The little guy is not as clingy as you." Pei Xinan stretched his legs and sat up straight, his waist instantly revealing the slim curves, but his chest felt slightly swollen and painful with anger. How can she be compared to a little baby who is still drinking milk? "Li Qingming, do you really want to die?" As soon as he spoke, Pei Xinan hung the sword on Li Qingming's neck again, his black hair flying slightly, with a little cold fluorescence lingering in the process. "Ha, as long as you are happy." Li Qingming turned over and changed his position to continue sleeping. This witch kept shouting that she wanted to kill him every day and asked herself if she wanted to die, but she never actually took action. Acting with others is also very tiring. "Do you really think I don't dare to kill you? Don't forget, you, Li Qingming, are just my Pei Xinan's plaything." Seeing that he was not afraid of being scalded by boiling water, Pei Xinan's eyes gradually became sharper, and the cold air on the blade became more and more threatening. "No, no, no, I'm scared to death." Li Qingming's tone was very perfunctory, just like a husband and wife who have been married for many years and the husband makes a few grunts to deal with his wife. When you reach middle age, you should be more considerate. But usually after this happens, the husband will turn around and comfort his wife. After all, she still has to live her life. Noticing that the temperature in the room was getting colder, and that his skin even had a faint feeling of being scraped by a knife blade, Li Qingming was also agitated, and then he remembered that a day had passed. This witch is not something he can manipulate as he likes yesterday. "To die, you witch didn't even remind me, and you still got into my arms. I think you are deliberately trying to find a reason to punish me." Li Qingming's breathing paused, and his heartbeat quickened for a short time. "What, are you scared?" This change was naturally captured by Pei Xinan. But, afraid, is Li Qingming afraid? Meeting, but he doesn't admit it. Li Qingming rolled his eyes and suddenly said with a smile, "I actually had a story I didn't finish last night. Do you want to listen to it?" "Ha ha." Pei Xinan was stunned for a moment, then sneered, "Do you think I'm Pei Zulu's age? Can I be coaxed into spinning around by your stories? Then why don't you listen? Li Qingming spread his hands. Pei Zinan pursed his lips and said calmly, let's hear what childish and ridiculous story you are going to make up. Yes, Li Qingming smiled, pretending not to notice that this enchantress's arrogant nature was full again, and slowly told the story. Once upon a time, the Dragon King of the East China Sea wanted to recruit a 100-pound as his son-in-law. Before he could finish his sentence, he was interrupted by Pei Zinan, East China Sea. Dragon King. When did the East China Sea have a Dragon King? Thousands of years ago, there was a dragon making trouble, and he was killed long ago, skinned and cramped. Can you be quiet? I don't know that the basic etiquette for listening to a story is to stay quiet. Li Qingming scolded him angrily, causing Pei Zinan to almost draw his sword again. His chest heaved before he suppressed the anger in his heart and listened to him seriously. A turtle came to my door and weighed 99 pounds, so I left disappointed. I met a good friend on the road, a prawn. When it heard this, it decided to hide in the turtle's ear and help it because it happened to weigh a pound. The turtle returned the same way and finally weighed 100 kilograms. The Dragon King curiously asked him why he suddenly gained 1 kilogram. The timid turtle got nervous and dropped his friend from his ears. The Dragon King asked what the shrimp was doing hiding in the turtle's ear. The shrimp said. Seeing Li Qingming betraying himself again, Pei Zinan was a little annoyed and asked, what did you say? It said. Li Qingming leaned close to Pei Zinan's ear. I'm telling a story to the fool. After learning the answer, Pei Zinan's breathing stopped slightly for a moment. She never expected that Li Qingming would dare to play with her again and again. Li Qingming, what? Isn't this story interesting? Before the outcome of the dispute between the two could be determined, they were interrupted by a little guy pushing in the door. Dad, Grandma, why are you still sleeping? The sun is shining down on your butts. The little guy looked at the two people on the bed with a disgusted look. I have already practiced my morning lessons. Don't underestimate children's self-initiative ability. With appropriate encouragement, they can often do very well. Awesome. Li Qingming, who was still in bed just now and wanted to go back to sleep, turned over and got out of bed, rubbing Pei Zulu's head and praising him, which made Pei Zinan feel a little unhappy for no reason. Why does this man always have such two faces? I really want to stab him to death with a sword. After accepting Li Qingming's compliments happily, the little guy jumped up and down in front of Pei Zinan. Aniang. Explain. I want to drink, Grandma, the little guy just said, causing Pei Zinan's finally calm state of mind to become unstable again, and his body became stiff naturally. Seeing Pei Zinan's silence, the little guy turned to Li Qingming and blinked, then got into the familiar arms of her and said in a sweet voice, Mommy, can I call Daddy to drink Grandma together? Quote. One person per side. After finishing speaking, the little guy was extremely proud. She, Pei Zulu, is not stingy at all. She will split with her father, Li Qingming, if she wants. I, little one, do what I say. Dad, don't be angry. What are you so angry about? Be discouraged. Yes, be angry. Dad, don't be angry. In the study, Pei Zulu, who had tears on his face, patted Li Qingming's knees with his small hands and comforted him. Next time, I will definitely ask my mother-in-law to allow us to drink milk together. After she invited Li Qingming to join a team to drink Grandma, her little butt naturally had to have a meal of fried bamboo shoots. The tears on my face have not been wiped clean yet. As for Li Qingming, he also suffered a lot of punishment, and now he is still weak. No need for you, my dear. Next time you can have a full meal alone, Li Qingming said without expressing any dissatisfaction in front of the little guy. Children don't understand anything, but they can be overly sensitive to some emotions. That's not okay. The little guy refused sternly, as serious as he wanted to be. Dad, you are not in good health. You can only stay healthy if you drink more milk. This is what my grandma told me before. Li Qingming was touched by his little cotton-padded jacket's thoughtfulness, but who said he was not in good health? If you have the ability, stand up. No, Dad is in good health. Li Qingming patted his chest, saying that he was in good health. Is it true? Pei Zulu scratched his face with a confused expression, but Grandma said that Daddy is not in good health, and there are some. She thought for a while before remembering the words she heard at that time, shoo. Li Qingming opened his mouth, but his face turned dark. This stinky witch slandered me again. I must write a short SAWB for you. Don't wait for the day when my cultivation level recovers, otherwise I will make you suffer severely. It's okay, Dad, I will definitely cure your illness and make you better. Seeing Li Qingming's silence, the little guy felt a little bad, although she didn't understand the word, shu, how to write it, and what it meant. She probably only knew that this might be a disease, but it didn't stop her from wanting to be nice to Li Qingming. Then what if it can't be cured? Li Qingming asked with a smile. Parents always have such strange thoughts. They always want to know from their children which parent they like more, and they also like to ask who they would like to live with if they get divorced. He also wanted his children to prove how much they love him, and Li Qingming couldn't follow the rules. Cure, can't be cured. The little guy frowned and was a little confused. This kind of problem was a bit difficult for her, but it didn't stop her from expressing love in her own way. Then I'll raise her Dad for life. This sentence was what she had seen in the picture book these days. Okay, haha. Li Qingming smiled heartily. Who could understand how happy it is to have such a caring little cotton-padded jacket? He just loves being his daughter's slave. What's wrong? Master Qingming. Uncle Fu knocked on the door outside, and after getting Li Qingming's answer, he entered the house. Grandpa Fu, Grandpa Fu. Before Li Qingming opened his mouth, the little guy couldn't wait to greet him and took out the candy from his pocket. You want some candy? My father and I bought this on the street yesterday. It's delicious. Got it. Pei Zulu also liked this kind-faced grandfather who often gave her some snacks and toys. Okay, little Zulu gave it to me. Grandpa Fu likes to eat it. Uncle Fu also took it with a smile. For him, Li Qingming was his grandson who was raised by himself, so his love for Pei Zulu was from the bottom of his heart. Li Qingming let the old and the young play around for a while before asking, is it about Zhang Shuming? Another invitation was sent over there yesterday, and someone from the Wen family came to apologize and brought gifts. Uncle Fu nodded, with some emotion in his words, I drove them all out with gifts. Quote, they are such a good group of people. Li Qingming did not hide his disdain at all, and then smacked his lips and said with regret, you should just keep the gift. Uncle Fu also laughed after hearing this, and apologized. It was the old slave who acted inappropriately. How could Uncle Fu not do this? How could the Wen family give generous gifts next time? Li Qingming is not a good gentleman, he has a heart. He accepts gifts does not equal accepts apology. The two of them are close relatives, how could they get into trouble over such a trivial matter? Zhang Junquan's banquet time for guests is today at noon. Uncle Fu continued, I saw that Master Qingming was busy yesterday, so I didn't tell him. Li Qingming nodded, not caring about it. Is he busy? Of course he is. Isn't he busy with his daughter? Does Forbes know? Of course he does. The old man and the young man just looked down on the Zhang family and the Wen family, or they didn't take them to heart at all. I have already prepared the gift for the young master. Uncle Fu took out a wooden box and placed it on the table. He wanted to leave the study silently, but he couldn't help but ask more, do you want me to accompany the young Master Qingming? Go on a trip. Uncle Fu, just stay at home and bask in the sun. If I really need you to grow old, I'll just call you. Li Qingming didn't want the old man to work anymore, although with his old body and bones, giving birth to a fat boy is easy. Okay, Uncle Fu always relied on Li Qingming's opinion. Let's go, little guy. Li Qingming rubbed Pei Zulu's little head, who was curious about what was in the wooden box. Go, where? I'll take you to a feast. She. Just eat delicious food, lots and lots of delicious food. Li Qingming changed his way of speaking to a simple one. Upon hearing this, the little guy's eyes suddenly lit up. He jumped up and down, excitedly hugged Li Qingming's neck, and almost died from his death. Just when Li Qingming was about to go out, Pei Zinan's figure suddenly appeared. She didn't speak, but Li Qingming knew what she meant. It's just a banquet, it's nothing. They don't have the guts to attack me. Pei Zinan snorted coldly and said through the message, who is worried about you? I'm just curious about the grand banquet in your Jojo palace. I don't think I said worry, right? The atmosphere became cold again. Li Qingming took pleasure in this, and suddenly heard another voice asking, what if I get bullied by them? What does it have to do with me? Pei Zinan's voice was as cold as her expression at this time. Li Qingming shrugged, hugged the little guy and was about to go out to the banquet, but Pei Zinan's cold voice sounded in his mind again. But if you dare to insult my plaything, Pei Zinan, there is a way to die. Is there a way to die? This kind of villain's classic lines really have a contrasting and cute meaning when Pei Zinan says it. Otherwise, how can we say she is a witch? Sensing Li Qingming's gaze, Pei Zinan sarcastically said, you also have a way to kill yourself. How dare you look directly at your master like this, just a plaything? Ah, cute chicken neck, stinky witch. Li Qingming cursed in his heart and silently looked away. He didn't want to be like this witch. Hey, why is grandma missing again? Hearing the little guy's confused voice, Li Qingming looked again and found that Pei Zinan was gone again. He knew that the witch was hiding in secret again. With her level, as long as she didn't rush into the forbidden areas of the treasure house, she could basically come and go freely. Hiding at this time is just for convenience. Li Qingming made up an excuse casually, she's playing hide and seek with us. I'll find her when I get back. Okay. The little guy was overjoyed, but in her heart she was thinking that without Pei Zinan, she would be able to find a new wife for her father. How great! Li Qingming, father and daughter, had just set off on their journey. On a peak with flying cranes in Jojo Palace, many people had already gathered, looking forward to their arrival. Hongyuan, did you really deliver the invitation to Li Qingming's house in person? The person who spoke was a female cultivator in an elegant dress. She had a beautiful face, but the arrogance that could not be concealed on her face and her long, upward-looking eyes diminished her beauty a bit. Her tone when she spoke was even more domineering. Mean. Senior sister Yu, Wang Hongyuan had long been accustomed to the difficulty of getting along with this noble girl who was also from the Zhang family, and said with a sincere smile on his face, I sent it to you, but I didn't see her in person. Zhang Yu's narrow eyes narrowed and his tone was cold. How come you, the core disciple of Jojo Palace, can't even accomplish this? There are tens of millions of mortals in the huge Jojo Palace, and there are naturally not a few disciples in the sect. From the outer sect to the inner sect, upwards are the core true teachings, one level at a time. But being scolded by Zhang Yu, who was also a core disciple, Wang Hongyuan could only smile and said, Junior brother's abilities are limited. And even if he whispered, all he got was a cold snort from Zhang Yu. The world of cultivation is based on strength, but when there are many people, it becomes a society no matter where you are. Not to mention that practitioners have a long lifespan, and the power of the clan is far greater than that of the aristocratic families in feudal society. The roots underground are unimaginable, and the intricate connections on the surface are daunting. What's wrong with Hongyuan? The fault lies with Li Qingming, who is so arrogant. It was the same in the past, and it is still the same now. A gentle male voice broke the slightly awkward atmosphere. Senior brother Xu Ming. Seeing the gentle and jade-like figure beside him, Zhang Yu, who was still arrogant just now, was filled with a soft smile, not hiding his admiration at all. Wang Hongyuan on the side also showed a genuine smile, senior brother Xu Ming. In terms of family background, talent, appearance, demeanor, Zhang Shuming is admired by many disciples in the sect, and he is surrounded by many people in the sect. He was once close to becoming a disciple of Xian Peak, but this year he was promoted to the true disciple. It even went dormant for several years. The reason is naturally that the high-spirited Li Qingming overshadowed all the limelight. What to fight for? Nothing to fight for. Compared with nothing, nothing can be compared. Never won once. Even if you are a nice and honest person, you will inevitably have deep grudges. Now that the situation between the two is reversed, it is not an exaggeration to say that they are worlds apart. Naturally, he wants to feel relieved. The banquet was a good banquet, and he was not despicable enough to take advantage of the banquet to attack Li Qingming, but Zhang Shuming also wanted Li Qingming to see with his own eyes his graceful rise and success. As for what other people would do, Zhang Shuming didn't care. Even if some people around him tried their dirty tricks, Zhang Shuming would only frown slightly. He just wanted his own thoughts to be clear. Even if he doesn't speak, there are still people below who want to use this to please him. But, suddenly remembering something, Zhang Shuming cast an inquiring look at Wang Hongyuan again. The latter understood, and glanced at Zhang Yu deliberately before speaking. Senior sister Yunqing, I also sent an invitation, and I also agreed to come to senior brother's banquet. Hearing this name, Jiang Shuming's face became a little brighter, and correspondingly, the smile gradually disappeared from the corners of Zhang Yu's mouth. Everyone in the entire Jojo Palace knew that Jiang Shuming was trapped in love. He had been chasing Zhang Yunqing for a long time, asking for something but not getting it. However, in this world, who can beat his chest and speak with absolute certainty? How can Li Qingming compare with Jiang Shuming today? Li Qingming, what you said to me, 30 years in Hedong and 30 years in Hexi, don't bully young people into poverty, I finally want to return it to you. Jiang Shuming felt more and more comfortable. Not only that, I also have good news that I haven't told senior brother Shuming. Wang Hongyuan gave it up. What good news? Li Qingming already has a 2 or 3-year-old daughter. Really? With Jiang Shuming's self-cultivation, he also showed an extremely surprised expression. He really couldn't imagine what kind of woman could catch his eye and give birth to a daughter for her, given Li Qingming's picky personality. Of course it's true. I've been wandering around Linan City every day these days. It seems that now that I have lost all my cultivation and there is no hope of rebuilding my foundation, I am planning to become a rich man, or I may be pinning my hopes on my daughter. Wang Hongyuan guessed. Then he will come with his daughter today. Wang Hongyuan knew what Jiang Shuming really wanted to ask, and replied, it doesn't matter whether he comes or not. No matter how well he hides his daughter, it is useless. There are so many eyes in the whole sect staring at him. The matter has already spread. Senior sister Zhang Yunqing has been in seclusion these days. I'm afraid she'll feel sad if she finds out today. Jiang Shuming's smile became warmer and warmer, and his joy was even greater. Only Zhang Yu felt gloomy. With Li Qingming's current status as a useless person, it would be very difficult for her sister Zhang Yunqing to get married to him again. It would take 100 years for her to be able to make the decision on her own. Now that a daughter suddenly appears, the matter is even more difficult, and the two are even at odds with each other. Jiang Shuming was naturally happy, but how could she be even half happy? Could it be that I wish him and Zhang Yunqing a happy marriage forever? When the three people were in different moods, there were suddenly some strange sounds in the courtyard. Junior sister Yunqing. The next moment, Jiang Shuming, who was elegant and the host, greeted him personally. Seeing this scene, Zhang Yu couldn't hold back his emotions at all, and his face was as dark as water. For the first time, she was eager to see Jiang Shuming. She would suffer another severe loss at the hands of Li Qingming today. Senior brother Jiang Shuming, our relationship is not familiar enough to call each other by our first names. I hope you respect yourself. When he heard his clan girl frowning in response, Zhang Yu felt a little better. Even if you do everything possible to please Zhang Yunqing, he will always show no mercy to you. What's the difference between you and me? No, you are not even as good as me. Jiang Shuming was also put off by Zhang Yunqing's straightforward words. The two of them have known each other since childhood and have deep connections in their families, so why are they not familiar with each other? Wang Hongyuan on the side felt embarrassed for Jiang Shuming and made a gesture of invitation. Senior sister Jiang, please take a seat first. Senior brother Shuming has already prepared for senior sister Jiang. With Wang Hongyuan calming down the atmosphere, Jiang Shuming became that elegant gentleman again. He was already prepared for what he was going to say next, but Zhang Yunqing interrupted Wang Hongyuan before he could finish his words. Not going. If senior brother Qingming doesn't see me at first sight when he comes here, then what am I doing here? Zhang Yunqing has always been known as the noble daughter of the Zhang family, with extraordinary talent and a pure heart. The literal meaning of Wuchen Chixin may be a little difficult to understand because it is too illusory and one-sided. But in Li Qingming's words, it is very easy to understand. She is just a straight person with no emotional intelligence and only tells the truth. And the truth is often a knife. Regardless of whether you are a powerful senior or an ordinary trafficker, she will treat you equally. If you have something to say, she will draw your sword. Soft-hearted but decisive. If you like it, say you like it. If you hate it, say you hate it. Another person might not be able to survive 20,000 words in other novels. But in this Jojo Palace, she, Zhang Yunqing, has the confidence to always remain true to her heart. Just like this, her words were equivalent to putting Jiang Shuming's face on the ground and stepping on it again and again. No one thought it was weird. They had already seen it. Even a few years ago, Li Qingming was imprisoned in the forbidden area for punishment by the palace owner for committing a crime. She even threatened her directly in front of the palace, saying that if her senior brother Qingming was not released earlier, she would go to the forbidden area to fight with her Qingming brother. Senior brother cooks raw rice. Can you imagine? At that time, a girl who was only 13 or 14 years old could say such a thing in front of the entire sect. Sure enough, it's still Zhang Yunqing. Many people sighed with the same emotion in their hearts, and at the same time they cursed. Li Qingming, you really deserve to die. Zhang Shuming cursed more than a dozen times in a row, and then tried his best to maintain his demeanor. It's because I didn't think carefully. Senior brother Qingming is a guest from afar, and I should have been here to welcome him. Who wants to show their bad side in front of the person they like? Moreover, a momentary setback means nothing. When junior sister Yunqing finds out that Li Qingming has already given birth to a child, she will definitely be disappointed with him. Zhang Shuming imagined it beautifully. But Zhang Yunqing did not accept this trick. He raised his eyes and said, "When did your relationship with my senior brother Qingming get so good? Aren't you senior brother Qingming in front of others and Li Qingming in the back? She just doesn't like to talk in a roundabout way, and she's not really stupid." One sentence made the whole place fall into silence again. It really is Zhang Yunqing. Even Wang Hongyuan hesitated for a moment whether to speak or continue to help Zhang Shuming. He knew that no matter how much he said, it would be like a thin layer of paper in front of Zhang Yunqing. Just like a natural idiot, Zhang Yunqing's words are always a sharp knife. Kill without spilling blood. But there are always people who don't know pain without seeing blood. Sister Yunqing, how can you say this to senior brother Shuming? Don't you know the difference between elder and younger? Zhang Yu was unhappy in his heart. It can be seen that Zhang Shuming couldn't help but lose face like this. She couldn't help it, and Zhang Yunqing would not tolerate her accusations either. Then do you know that there is an order of hierarchy? You see, you are a branch of the Zhang family, you must bow when you see me. Yu Gong, I am one of the top 10 true heirs, you are just a core disciple, you want to call me senior sister. Finally, Zhang Yunqing learned from Li Qingming's point of view and added one word lightly. Understand, Zhang Shuming doesn't even take you into his heart, so don't belittle yourself like a loser. After a few words, Zhang Yu couldn't help but retorted, then what's the difference between you and me? Thank you for the invitation. Senior brother Qingming has me in his heart. Zhang Yunqing answered seriously, and said the catchphrase he heard from Li Qingming, but it sounded full of condescending sarcasm. Zhang Yu was so angry that his face turned blue and white, and finally he disappeared without saying a word. Not to mention the disciples beside him, even Zhang Shuming felt his scalp tingle when he heard it. The scheming Wang Hongyuan felt a chill in his back. Who taught him such sharp teeth and sharp mouth? Who else could it be? Of course it's her senior brother Qingming. Dad, there are so many people at the door. Are they waiting for us? A curious milk sound sounded at the right time, breaking this extremely weird atmosphere. Everyone heard the sound and looked around with different emotions in their hearts. I'm coming. Not only did he, Li Qingming, come, he actually came with his daughter. Looking at these figures, big and small, Zhang Shuming finally came to life again. He couldn't help but cast his eyes towards Zhang Yunqing. Seeing that Zhang Yunqing did not rush towards people directly and affectionately like he did when he saw Li Qingming in the past, but slowly lowered his head, Zhang Shuming was inevitably a little emotional. Junior sister Yunqing, I finally let you see the true face of this piece of shit Li Qingming. He didn't know how many times he had fantasized about this scene over the years. Immediately afterwards, he noticed that the skin around the girl's ears was slowly seeping into a faint red pink. Zhang Shuming felt that he had finally seen the moonlight after the clouds cleared. Li Qingming, you lost. You finally lost to me. Junior sister Yunqing is so angry that you are blushing. Who knows how much determination he made, how much effort he put in, and how many sleepless nights he spent in the past 2.5 years. The depression accumulated in his chest for many years was swept away. Zhang Shuming felt that his state of mind had improved a lot, but he immediately felt sorry for the girl beside him who was bowing his head. Junior sister Yunqing must be very sad now, right? Li Qingming, you really deserve to die. But after all, He was a mature nascent soul cultivator, and Jiang Shuming also knew that at this time he should remain still to cope with the changes. But things took another turn that he couldn't figure out. Daddy, put me down quickly, I want to find Sister Piao Niang. I saw the little girl who looked like a lucky baby in Li Qingming's arms being placed on the ground, then running in his direction and hugging Zhang Yunqing's calf. And Zhang Yunqing, who he thought was so angry and sad that he cried silently, finally raised his head. There was no trace of anger or sadness, only an unknown shyness and apprehension on his face. Sister Piao Niang, Sister Piao Niang. Lulu, don't call me sister, okay? Well, the little guy blinked and scratched his cheek with his chubby little hands. Well, what should I call Sister Piao Niang? Zhang Yunqing blushed, glanced at Li Qingming quickly, and then said to the little guy. Shout, call me, Auntie. Have I gone crazy? I must have gone crazy. Definitely is. It can't be. What he saw in front of him and what he heard in his ears made Zhang Shuming fall into a strange and bizarre state, and the spiritual world he had established for a long time showed signs of collapse. Except for the possibility that he had gone crazy, Zhang Shuming could not find any other reason to convince himself. He is one of the most famous and proud sons in the Jojo Palace. Most of the disciples in the sect where he was born are chasing a class that they will never reach in their lifetime. They have only suffered losses again and again with Li Qingming, but they still have arrogance in their hearts. He, Zhang Shuming, has the confidence and ability to be arrogant for a lifetime. But you, the noble daughter of the Zhang family, how come you don't have any arrogance at all? Please, Li Qingming already has a daughter with another woman. Even if you don't cry with sadness, why should you part ways? Even if you can't let go of Li Qingming, you shouldn't tell his children to call you Aniang, right? And, still looking shy, looking at the blush on the face that always spoke coldly to him, Zhang Shuming suddenly felt his blood surge and he couldn't control himself for a moment. Good news. That Li Qingming has a daughter. There is no chance for him and Zhang Yunqing. Bad news. She, Zhang Yunqing, is willing to be his daughter's mother. Senior brother Shuming. Senior brother Shuming. Wang Hongyuan saw something was wrong and immediately gave Zhang Shuming a secret hand. Not to mention Zhang Shuming, many of the disciples in the field, including him, did not make a sound for a long time. No, why is he Li Qingming? You country bumpkins, how could you know how scary it is to be upright in love? Li Qingming sighed in his heart, stepped forward, hugged the little one, and pinched her cheek. Stop messing around. Qing, senior brother Qingming. Zhang Yunqing couldn't help but feel a little anxious before he heard the two words he had been thinking about lately from Pei Zulu's mouth, but what he got was a warning look from Li Qingming. Even though there were thousands of words in his heart, it has to be suppressed for the time being. Li Qingming finally breathed a sigh of relief. You don't want your life, I still want it. Of these two, one really dares to say it, and the other really dares to respond. It would have been fine in normal times, but now Li Qingming said that the demon girl somewhere must have narrowed her eyes, just waiting for the little guy to speak so that she could take action. If she really heard the cry of a Niang, Li Qingming would not be thinking about the mood of these classmates present, but how many of them would survive. Ah Fei. Ah, junior brother Shuming, how are you doing lately? Li Qingming greeted him first. After all, they are all old acquaintances. Zhang Shuming, who tried his best to suppress his emotions, could no longer maintain his usual demeanor. He nodded coldly and turned around to walk into the courtyard. He still couldn't figure out where he lost. Brother Qingming, please don't mind. Brother Shuming has just broken through the realm not long ago and his mind is not yet stable. Wang Hongyuan, a long-sleeved and good dancer, could only step forward to calm the atmosphere. A group of beautiful maids also walked out of the courtyard. Leading these, the disciple went to the courtyard. And he walked up to Li Qingming in person and bowed in a gesture of invitation. Senior brother and sister, I will take you to your seat. Although he was Zhang Shuming's man, his attitude at the moment really made Li Qingming unable to have any objectionable thoughts. Coming from an ordinary background, his talent was only in the middle of the pack among the core disciples. The reason why Wang Hongyuan became Zhang Shuming's right-hand man was because of his exquisite heart and disregard for his figure. Excuse me, junior brother, Li Qingming hugged the little guy and walked all the way inside. He and Jiang Shuming had been fighting for so many years, and there was some grudge, but it really wasn't to the point of life and death. At best, it was just the grudge that Boiling Goat had against Pleasant Goat. As for Ah Fei, most of them have no brains or scheming. It's just that in Jojo Palace, except for those at the top, there are not many disciples who can do whatever they want. There are all kinds of game calculations everywhere. Dozens of disciples attending the banquet sat down one after another, and the further inside they came, the more advanced they were in cultivation or their family backgrounds were extraordinary. The only similarities between these people were the undisguised teasing gazes when they looked at Li Qingming, and the not-so-hidden sarcasm. Some even came up to say hello to Li Qingming, but there was no trace of concern in their words. Even though they lamented the impermanence of the world, there was still a deep sense of schadenfreude hidden in them. Zhang Yunqing almost drew his sword several times. The set of respect and inferiority in the mortal world is also common in the world of spiritual practice. And the ugliness of the shrews in the market also exists. Brother Qingming, I'm going to add another small table. Wang Hongyuan led Li Qingming to the banquet table on the left closest to the main seat. He turned around and wanted to prepare another set of tables and chairs for the little guy, but was stopped by Zhang Yunqing. I want to move Zongda with me, senior brother Qingming. This. Wang Hongyuan paused, pointed to the first banquet table on the right with a smile, and said, senior sister Yang's seat is also opposite, right next to senior brother Li. Naturally, he was very considerate when doing things, not only keeping Li Qingming in the most eye-catching position, but also keeping Zhang Yunqing at a not too close distance from him, so that others could not find fault, and Zhang Yunqing would not be allowed to find fault. Shuming felt unhappy. Therefore, they were placed on the left and right of each other, and the desk table for Zhang Yunqing was deliberately moved much closer to the main seat. The main thing is to be safe. No matter how close we are not as close as sitting together with senior brother Qingming. Zhang Yunqing paid no attention to this. And what if you want to do something evil at the banquet, such as poisoning? Zhang Yunqing's blunt words immediately made Wang Hongyuan sweat profusely. Senior sister, where did you come from? A banquet without roots is a good feast. Given Li Qingming's current situation, sitting in such a close position would naturally be an eyesore. Zhang Shuming didn't care what the other disciples did, he just wanted Li Qingming to be close so he could see how prosperous he was. Hey, are you envious, Li Qingming? But poisoning or something like that, in Jojo Palace, where the rules are more important than the sky, no one dares to have such twisted thoughts. Then I'll trouble you to get a bigger one. Zhang Yunqing spoke again. This. Wang Hongyuan froze again. It's not that he doesn't want to, but if it were to be a table with 8 immortals, who would be the host and who would be the guest today? Stop messing around, go back to your seat, Li Qingming interrupted. How dare he let Zhang Yunqing get too close to him? Who would save him when the witch went crazy? One by one, they all want to harm me. Li Qingming really wanted to bring the little guy to have a feast. With Zhang Shuming's face-saving nature, every grain of rice at today's banquet was a rare thing that would make some disciples in the sect jealous. It would be great to bring the little ones to try it. When Zhang Shuming, who had changed into a somewhat coquettish Xingyi, came out, the graceful maids also brought out delicacies one after another. The little guy is drooling just looking at it. Li Qingming just wanted to smile and use chopsticks to help Pei Zulu pick up the food, but his eyes suddenly stopped on the maid in front of him who was bending over to put the dishes. It was not because of the maid's outstanding figure, but this is no maid, she is clearly Pei Zinan in disguise. As if aware of Li Qingming's gaze, Pei Zinan also showed a playful smile and winked at him playfully. Without any communication, Li Qingming thought that this witch must have tampered with the party. No one else poisoned me. Then you, a witch, come down to me yourself, right? For a moment, Li Qingming broke out in a cold sweat behind his back. They had been living together in harmony for a few days, but he had forgotten that this witch was the most troublemaking woman, and enjoyed playing tricks on others to make them look ugly. Isn't this banquet, led by Zhang Shuming and inviting a group of core disciples from Jojo Palace, her favorite occasion? Why are you sweating, master? I'll wipe it for you. Pei Zinan said softly, holding a silk scarf in one hand to help Li Qingming wipe a few beads of sweat from his forehead. His movements were so gentle that those who didn't know thought he was the maid with a charming voice and soft body wants to climb up the branch and become a phoenix. The rest of the people present didn't feel anything was wrong. Isn't this what these maids should do? But Zhang Yunqing, who was opposite him, couldn't stand it any longer, so he ducked and snatched the silk scarf from Pei Zinan's hand. How could he get another woman to do something like this? Brother, let me wipe your sweat for you. How dare Li Qingming? Didn't you see the enchantress watching with a smile? Ahem, I can do it myself. Li Qingming tried to take the silk scarf, but didn't pull it. When he looked up, he saw Zhang Yunqing's brows were slightly puzzled. She said, "Why didn't you come by yourself just now? Why do you have to do it by yourself now? Senior brother, you are the one again. Do you dislike junior sister? Okay, you are so capable, right? If you are so capable, why don't you ask the demon girl next to you if you can embarrass your senior brother and me every day?" Li Qingming felt like sitting on pins and needles when he had trouble talking about it. He had no doubt that the next second, the two women around him would open it. Oh no, it should be him, junior sister Zhang, who was unilaterally educated by Pei Zinan. Once you fall in love with a brain fairy, how can you fight against a demonic witch? Taking advantage of his silence, Zhang Yunqing took back the silk scarf and said with a serious face, "Senior brother, you need to be more careful now. Be careful of those who come close to senior brother. They may be spies of the demon sect." Zhang Yunqing was naturally not a maid on the inner side, and she didn't care much about the latter at all. I am a noble daughter of the Zhang family, why would I make things difficult for a maid? A love brain like her has her own set of rules for doing things, and the top one among them is what she just said. Except for her, all the others who tried to get close to Li Qingming were all bad women with evil intentions. Zhang Yunqing also takes care of due etiquette. She does things according to her heart, but she will consider right and wrong first. If it weren't for this maid, she really couldn't find any suitable reason to stay with Li Qingming. Thinking about this at this time, she nodded to Pei Zinan's disguise as a maid. "Thank you, I will take care of my senior brother. Junior sister Zhang, don't be so brave." Li Qingming said he was not worried, but it was a lie. He glanced at Pei Zinan and found that the witch was actually standing beside him obediently, watching Zhang Yunqing wipe the sweat from his forehead. But the slightly narrow smile at the corner of her mouth was particularly obvious in Li Qingming's eyes, and even had some extra interesting meaning. Exclamation mark. Why do you have the illusion that junior sister Zhang has become a part of this witch's play? Awesome, what kind of NTR meaty manga? I'm not the protagonist or the heroine, but the heroine, right? Li Qingming felt extremely weird in his heart. He always felt that this enchantress was having enough fun. The little guy who had been staring at the delicacies on the table for a long time had no idea that her father had just experienced a sweaty little dilemma. He turned around and said like a baby to Zhang Yunqing, Sister Pian Nian, I want to rub it too, I want it too. The kid just wants to hang out with his pretty sister, so there's nothing wrong with that." But Li Qingming took the silk scarf and wiped Pei Zulu's mouth himself. "Dad, I also want Sister Piao Niang to wipe my forehead. Baby, I really feel sorry for you when you get spanked by that witch again." Li Qingming sighed inwardly, but turned around with a smile and picked up a piece of ribs from some spiritual beast for her and said, "Sister, I want to eat too. Dad, come on, just take care of yourself." "Okay, Daddy will eat it too." Although Pei Zulu was young, he had always been well behaved and listened to her daddy's words the most. Li Qingming nodded and kept holding dishes for the little guy. He was sure that the demon girl had done something, and he knew that it would not affect their little guy. The witch is a witch, but a Niang's identity is not bad. At the same time, Zhang Shuming, who was watching this scene from the main seat, twitched his eyes and the luminous cup in his hand turned into powder without realizing it. He held the banquet to show off for himself, not to see you, Li Qingming, show off in front of my eyes. This scene really looks like a happy family of three. Pain. It hurts so much. Wang Hongyuan, who was guiding the atmosphere in the venue, noticed this scene and quietly took out an identical wine glass and refilled Zhang Shuming's glass. After drinking the wine in the glass in one gulp, Zhang Shuming was suddenly stunned, and then there was a thunder in his stomach. The whole face also turned the color of pig liver, red and purple, as if he was trying his best to endure some unspeakable pain. Hongyuan. Seeing him like this, Wang Hongyuan's heart jumped directly into his throat. and he lost the slightest bit of stability he used to have. Senior brother Shuming, what's wrong with you? I. Jiang Shuming struggled to hold back a few words, as if he wanted to say something, and then his body suddenly stopped. Puff, puff, puff puff. After a burst of ups and downs, the screen behind Jiang Shuming was shattered to pieces. Senior brother Shuming. Someone in the room stood up and expressed concern, but halfway through the words, his neck and entire face turned red. Then, puff, puff. Then there was an explosion-like sound in the whole place, which was mixed with various shouts of panic or shame. Yes, someone poisoned me. Poo-poo-poo. The demon gate is attacking Jojo Palace. Phew. Jiang Shuming. All your mother. All kinds of chaotic sounds and popping sounds came and went, and it was so lively. The smell of incense suddenly filled the place. Dad, what's going on outside? As early as the moment he heard some abnormal noises, Zhang Yunqing activated a certain magic weapon, forming a fluorescent film to protect several people inside, blocking out most of the sounds and smells outside. He also didn't forget Pei Zinan pretending to be a maid next to him. The little guy was enjoying his meal. When he saw the chaotic scene outside, he didn't care about the half-bitten bird leg in his hand and looked left and right curiously. They might have had a quarrel. Well, they just had a quarrel. But it sounds a bit noisy. Oh, they are setting off firecrackers, it's so noisy. Oh, when the little guy heard this, he suddenly lost interest and started chewing on the chicken legs in his hand. Li Qingming looked at this smelly scene, and while his eyes twitched, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but raise crazily. Those who were able to come to this banquet were all somewhat unhappy with him. At this moment, they looked at them who were still pretending to be affectionate just now, and each of them became more embarrassed than the other from their fairy-like appearance. Really, he feels so good. The disciples of these aristocratic families in the Jojo Palace pay attention to pomp and show, and they also pay most attention to appearance. Not to mention such ugly and ridiculous scenes, Li Qingming was very tired of this in the past when he went out from head to toe, so he was busy taking out the photo stone at this time. Such a scene is very rare. In just a few breaths, there were no other people in the scene, leaving only a messy table, and those precious spiritual food and spiritual wine also spilled all over the floor. The little guy happily finished chewing the big chicken leg in his hand and wiped away the few pots of vegetables on the table. He suddenly raised his head and was stunned. Dad, how come all the people who were so hot just now are missing? Already. Let's go after the quarrel. Okay. The little guy nodded, looking longingly at the plate on the next table, and then looked down at the plate in front of him, feeling somewhat tempted to lick the plate. Good times, but not enough times. Zhang Yunqing, who had been silent all this time, saw it and asked directly, "Are you full?" The little guy came back to his senses and hurriedly shook his head and explained, "That's enough, that's enough. I'll just eat a little bit." As she said this, she did not forget to secretly glance at Zhang Yunqing's expression, and added emphatically, "I have a small appetite, and I feel full after eating a little. It's very nourishing." This little guy is worried that his appetite is too big, and he is afraid that his sister Piaonong will find it easy to starve her father, so what should he do if he turns around and scares away her father? She is the new wife I found for my father with great difficulty. Zhang Yunqing obviously couldn't understand this idea, so he just said, "Then let's do it next time." Next time? What next time? Today's spiritual food can only be said to be barely adequate, and the banquet does not look like a banquet. Seeing that you like it very much, I thought of taking you to my place and asking the spiritual chef at home to prepare another table for you. General Zhang Yunqing he said what he was thinking, but found that the cute little guy in front of him suddenly had a sad face. "I'm hungry, but I still want to do it." Pei Zulu pursed his lips slightly and looked pitifully at the empty plates on the table. When he saw the loss in her eyes, Zhang Yunqing suddenly panicked. "I haven't even heard her call her Anyang yet. What if she's tired of me now? Did I say something wrong just now?" She obviously ate so happily. One big and one small suddenly fell silent. Li Qingming really couldn't bear to see the old and the young talking to each other here, and was afraid that there would be a drama of deep love between mother and daughter later. He really didn't take the witch in his eyes, right? Then let's do it next time. When junior sister Zhang breaks out of the border, senior brother, I will shamelessly bring the little guy to your door to ask for some spiritual food. Li Qingming said, ending the slightly weird atmosphere. Senior brother, you really have me in your heart. Dual cultivation is just around the corner. The worry in Zhang Yunqing's heart disappeared instantly. Daddy really cares about me. The little guy was also beaming and happily wanted to roll around in Li Qingming's arms. Only Li Qingming felt goosebumps aroused by the faint cold breath surrounding his neck. I can't stay in this shitty, Shira field, for a minute. Li Qingming hugged the little guy and stood up directly. After watching such a good show today, it was time to go home, but the witch was nowhere to be seen again. If he wants to leave, Zhang Yunqing will naturally not be able to stay any longer. But before they could take a step forward, Wang Hongyuan's urgent call to stay came from behind. Sister, please stay. Senior brother Qingming, please stay. Senior brother Qingming, senior sister Zhang. Wang Hongyuan was also very distressed after what happened, but he still had to help Zhang Shuming save some face. Just now, there was a glitch in the technique practiced by senior brother Shuming, and I forgot about you too, Haihan. Zhang Shuming, who had changed his clothes, appeared with a cold face again, with a faint scent of sandalwood lingering around him. Today's reception was not very good. I will invite senior brother Qingming to junior sister Zhang to apologize for the banquet tomorrow. After such ugliness, if he really hides, he will really give in to what others say. Next time, definitely next time. When junior brother Shuming practices, don't forget to regulate your stomach and intestines. Li Qingming responded cheerfully without hiding his smile at all. Zhang Shuming's face became a little colder. I'll see my senior brother off. Wang Hongyuan quickly interrupted. If there was another conflict, Zhang Shuming's face would really be lost. He was relieved when he saw Li Qingming refused and turned around to leave. But a child's words that came from far away made his expression change drastically. Daddy, Daddy, why did that uncle inside just stink? It seems a little bit. It stinks, even worse than when I farted secretly in bed last night. Doesn't he like to be clean? It's hard to say, but it's always right to love cleanliness. That's right, that uncle doesn't like to be clean, so he will definitely not be able to please his mother-in-law. He's so clingy. Wang Hongyuan couldn't help but smile when he heard these childlike words, but looking at Zhang Shuming's gloomy expression that could make water drop, he could only say, children's words are unbridled, childish words are unbridled. How could I, the majestic Zhang Shuming, argue with a child? Zhang Shuming snorted coldly, but before he could finish the sentence, his face turned red from holding back. Senior brother, how about I go find a pharmacist? Wang Hongyuan. No need. Zhang Shuming paused again. What replaced his words was a clear sound, poof. What pharmacist are you looking for? I'm fine. Puff, I'm really fine. Puff, puff, Hongyuan, go find the pharmacist. Puff puff, brother, I will take you down the mountain. Zhang Yunqing didn't want to be separated from Li Qingming at all, and Li Qingming didn't want to stay with her any longer. I even asked you to take me down the mountain. If others see me, won't they laugh at me again? Who dares? Zhang Yunqing said these two words directly, but when she met Li Qingming's eyes, she still chose to give in. Then senior brother will have to bring the little guy to me in a while. Li Qingming promised that having too many women in the family would be nothing but torture for him. Definitely next time. Zhang Yunqing reluctantly watched Li Qingming and the little guy go away until they completely disappeared from the field of vision. She turned around silently and unexpectedly saw the maid just now, who seemed to have been waiting for a long time. What's the matter? Zhang Yunqing has always had no prejudice against these maids, and his tone is cold but not repulsive. I'm just curious. What are you curious about? Senior sister is obviously a noble daughter of the Zhang family, so why do you fall in love with Li Qingming, who has now fallen into the mortal world? Zhang Yunqing frowned when she heard this. She was tired of this kind of words the most. In the past, she didn't even bother to answer. Now, after a slight hesitation, she actually spoke. I admire my senior brother. What does it matter to him? But he already has a daughter with someone else. So what? There was a hint of determination on Zhang Yunqing's face. My heart towards senior brother Qingming has never changed, and his flesh and blood are also my biological flesh and blood. What's more, that cold woman has already abandoned me, senior brother Qingming. In the eyes of the people in Jojo Palace, Li Qingming suddenly had a daughter. Wasn't it because he was disliked by others? Upon hearing this, even with Pei Zinan's knowledge, his expression froze. You, Zhang Yunqing, are a piece of shit, a noble daughter of the Zhang family. What if the woman didn't abandon him? Pei Zinan asked again. But Zhang Yunqing didn't care. Instead, she showed a bit of a lady's attitude, and she said lightly, I'll tell her to quit when she's in trouble. Quitting when faced with difficulties. When Pei Zinan heard this powerful sentence, he smiled instead of getting angry and watched Zhang Yunqing disappear with narrowed eyes. She was really looking forward to how this noble daughter of the Zhang family would make her retreat in spite of the difficulties. Otherwise, Pei Zinan, the demon sect's enchantress, must let this noble daughter of the Zhang family know how to write about retreating from difficulties. You shouldn't be the one who gives up when faced with difficulties. But she, Zhang Yunqing. Thinking like this, Pei Zinan's eyes also had some unpredictable and strange looks. And this difficulty is not a difficulty, it is my Nan, Pei Zinan. Li Qingming felt a little uneasy all the way back to Linan City. On one side is a moody seductress, on the other side is a love-minded noblewoman. When these two meet together, he cannot tell the exact number of sparks. But it is definitely enough to put on a sparkle show. There is no need to think too much about the result. Zhang Yunqing, who was surrounded by stars in the Jojo Palace, had no chance of winning against Pei Zinan. It's okay to suffer a little loss. Li Qingming didn't think this was a bad thing. The demon girl was more or less a normal person when she wasn't having an attack. She cherished her life very much, and she knew how to judge the situation and not be ruthless in the hinterland of Jojo Palace. At the banquet today, there was no real sinister plot, it was just to make those people lose their face. Li Qingming was not worried at all about her revealing her secret. With Pei Zinan's methods, he was sure that those people would investigate, and in the end, at most, the result would be a conflict between spiritual food and medicine. Junior sister Zhang, it's not that my senior brother is cruel. You will gain wisdom after every experience. From now on, don't worry about being my baby's mother. Don't talk about your half-heartedness, even senior brother, I can't defeat this witch. Li Qingming thought so, took a long sip of tea, and listened to the occasional laughter from the little guy outside the house. Suddenly he understood why those old men loved to hold a pot of tea and lie in the courtyard without taking a sip. Slurping. It is rare in life to be somewhat leisurely. With the addition of a little one in the family, he gradually began to have some thoughts of a happy life. Only, as a gust of fragrant wind came, Li Qingming, who was sitting at the table, suddenly found that there was a fragrant person in his arms. Teacher, senior brother. It was Zhang Yunqing, who was so weak that he couldn't even speak. His face was pale, and the bright red blood stains on the corners of his mouth were particularly conspicuous. His green clothes had lost the elegant fairy spirit of the past. His eyes were sparkling with tears, and his expression was very pitiful. Li Qingming's eyelids twitched and he was really frightened. This witch has dealt such a heavy hand. Without any time to think about it, Li Qingming hurriedly took out a few treasure pills from the storage ring and drank them for her. Soon he saw some color on Zhang Yunqing's face. Li Qingming breathed a sigh of relief. After calming down for a while, he realized that the man in his arms was depressed, but he was not the kind of person whose fate was about to expire. Even if he drank a few bottles of pills, he was relieved, can also pull her back from the gate of hell. Moreover, she has many more life-saving elixirs than herself. Thinking without any malice, Li Qingming felt that if she had taken the elixir as soon as possible, she might have recovered as before. Don't doubt that there's anything your love brain can't do. This is not the first time he has encountered such a scene. Every time he is injured, he is really injured, but no matter how serious it is, he will always do something like this. Whenever this happens, the weak-minded daughter of the Zhang family will also show her little daughter side. Seeing her lying in his arms with her eyes closed and silent, Li Qingming suddenly felt a headache. Yunqing, if you have nothing to do, just get up from my arms. You are not a child now. If you tell me, it will make people laugh. Senior brother Qingming, I'm injured. I know. Senior brother Qingming, I'm injured. I just fed you the elixir. Senior brother Qingming, I'm really hurt. Yes, you are injured, and you are almost healed. I haven't recovered yet, unless my senior brother agrees to practice dual cultivation with me. Before Zhang Yunqing finished speaking, he found that he had been placed on the soft couch. Li Qingming would not let her have the opportunity to push her further at this time, because Zhang Yunqing's request from childhood has changed from, "I need my senior brother to heal myself," to, "I need to cultivate with my senior brother to heal myself." "Can't you look like a noble daughter of the Zhang family?" Senior brother Qingming. Zhang Yunqing, who was on the couch, still pursed his lips and called in a low voice. "Okay, tell me how you got hurt." Zhang Yunqing started talking, then frowned and paused for a long time. Then he slowly told the story of what happened. "On the way back, I seemed to be trapped in some kind of magic circle. There was no light. I struggled but couldn't defeat the person in the dark. Finally, I took advantage of the gap to activate the teleportation. Then we arrived at senior brother's place." Li Qingming frowned, and was immediately sure that this was Pei Xinan's method, and for a moment he didn't know how to speak. His little junior sister Zhang had clearly suffered an unreasonable disaster. Maybe Pei Xinan was hiding aside and snooping at this moment. This witch, what kind of bullshit XP is this? Thinking that Pei Xinan might still be unscrupulously admiring his expression at this moment, Li Qingming's scalp went numb. Why did I get into trouble with her? Junior sister, it would be better for you to stay in seclusion these days. With the palace master by your side, no one dares to attack you, junior sister. Li Qingming suppressed his guilt and gave sincere advice. Senior brother. Zhang Yunqing hesitated, his face still as stubborn as ever. Senior brother, I don't worry about you being here, Li Qingming sighed, his tone being sincere. The trouble Zhang Yunqing caused him in the past was really nothing, but now that the enchantress is lingering in his house, isn't this adding fuel to the flames and costing his life? He really couldn't bear it. When he went to bed last night, he already felt that his back was sore. I do not go. You. Li Qingming's head swelled before he wanted to speak again, but he saw that the fairy in green on the couch had revealed a touch of her fragrant shoulders, which was so white that it was dazzling. Others have always had slippery shoulders. Why did you start slipping at such a young age? The lining inside has gone somewhere and is still looming. Li Qingming, however, had no intention of appreciating this beautiful scene, and alarm bells rang in his heart. No, this cup is wrong. My junior sister is not that old. Li Qingming suddenly woke up, and his panic caused him to subconsciously ignore certain details. This height, this width, this arc. It's clearly Pei Xinan. Li Qingming was startled and broke into a cold sweat. He looked up and saw Pei Xinan's bright and charming smile on the body half covered in green clothes. Li Qingming's face was expressionless, but he was complaining in his heart. No, what kind of XP do you have, you witch? I just love to play cosplay and NTR, right? But with just a gentle smile, her beautiful face instantly shone with light. Senior brother Qingming, junior sister wants to practice double cultivation with you. In his previous life, Li Qingming failed to become a man. I don't know how wonderful the experience of eating the essence is. When he came to the practice world here, he also fell in love with the wonderful feeling that penetrated deeply into the soul when practicing breakthrough. If you are a man, come and make 100. Bah. If you are a man, you should become stronger. Once upon a time, his goal was to be a handsome Saitama teacher who was not bald. But in recent days, he has gradually become decadent. Hey, you stinky witch, ruined my practice. Putting on his clothes, Li Qingming thought bitterly in his heart, and vowed that he would rather die than obey next time. What do you mean? Let me stay down there every day. Tell me, where should I, Li Qingming, put my face? And all kinds of emotions disappeared when they saw the little guy. Daddy, 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 daddy. Pei Zulu made a long milky sound and jumped into Li Qingming's arms. She hadn't seen him for a few hours. She missed her father so much. Have you finished your homework? Yeah, the little guy nodded vigorously. She was a little lazy, but she was never vague in her work. After coming back from the banquet, the little girl didn't need to ask Li Qingming or Pei Xinan to speak. She went to the courtyard to do her homework in an orderly manner. She wiped the sweat by herself, got up and continued when she fell. Hey, Dad, you smell like Grandma. Pei Zulu wrinkled his little nose and sniffed like a cat. It smells like milk, it smells like milk. Li Qingming's expression froze. When he was fighting hard, he couldn't hold back his last few mouthfuls. As a result, he was scratched by the demon girl on his back with a bloody mark, and he is still feeling pain. But this matter is ultimately inappropriate to talk about in front of children. Stupid, Dad has been with you for a long time, so he smells like milk. Li Qingming ticked the little guy's nose. Really, my mother-in-law used to say I stink and wouldn't let me hold her in my arms. She's talking nonsense. You're so sweet. Hey, I miss Daddy so much. Pei Zulu couldn't help but rub his little face against Li Qingming. No matter when she was happy or expressing love, the little guy loved to use this action. Li Qingming also enjoyed the intimacy between father and daughter very much. He hugged her and returned to the study to read the picture books to her, and also taught her to read some words. The sky quickly changed from a bright sunset to a dark one. Daddy, why do all the Taoist priests in the story say they want to subjugate demons and submit to Mo? After listening to Li Qingming tell the story of the demonic version of Fox Demon Ni Xiaochen, the little guy raised his head and asked, with a faint tone in his voice. Some tension. Conquer the demons. Li Qingming wrote these 4 words again and thought for a while before explaining, because from their standpoint, the demon is the bad side. Are demons bad? It can't be so absolute. Looking at the little guy's big confused eyes, Li Qingming felt that it was necessary to establish some understanding for her in advance while she was still young. The monks in this world have the means to move mountains and reclaim seas, so naturally there will be all kinds of monsters. Since ancient times, human monks have slowly come to dominate this world through constant competition with other races. There have been so many disputes, blood, and tears that it has long been difficult to tell who is right and who is wrong. Human beings dominate the practice world, and the demon clan is naturally declining day by day. Except for a few demon clan who have become followers of some aristocratic sects, the rest have all fled to some secret realm of the demon clan. Of the stories of slaying demons, only the latter is still popular among righteous monks. Occasionally, there are rumors of sporadic demons causing trouble to mortal cities. Like humans, demons must have good and bad qualities, but some things that seem normal to demons are actually bad things that are harmful to nature and morality in the eyes of Taoist priests. Pei Zulu couldn't understand what he heard, so he just stared at Li Qingming and waited for the next words. Well, it's like the spiritual rabbit we ate today. Is it delicious? Good times. When Pei Zulu heard this, he was so excited that he jumped out of Li Qingming's arms. The corners of his mouth were slightly sparkling, and his mouth was filled with saliva just from the aftertaste. Daddy will take you to eat some other time. Seeing her look like this, Li Qingming couldn't help but laugh, and then said seriously, the spiritual rabbit is delicious, but if we eat it, what will the mother of the spiritual rabbit think? Li Qingming knew that it was difficult for the little guy to understand some things at his age. For her, things were not impermanent, but that she had not yet formed a concrete understanding, and she needed the guidance of an adult. But when it fell into the ears of the little guy who only had eyes for spiritual rabbits, it had a different meaning. Why does Mother Rabbit smell so good? How to make Mother Rabbit fragrant? Then it will definitely taste good no matter how you cook it. The little guy smashed his pink lips, clasped his fingers, and said in a serious tone, it's the most fragrant when roasted, and it's also fragrant when braised, and it should be very spicy. Quote. Quote. Li Qingming laughed dryly, feeling a little lucky in his heart. Fortunately, I didn't mean to eat the baby rabbit, I should have also eaten the mother rabbit. It's crooked, but not too crooked. Let's not talk about how to make rabbits delicious. If the baby rabbit is listening to stories in his father's arms like you are now, but is captured by the bad guy Shang Shang, what will happen to his father? Li Qingming changed his expression. I don't want to leave Dad. The little guy seemed to have witnessed some extremely terrifying scenes, and crawled into Li Qingming's arms again. The 2 little hands holding his clothes turned red due to excessive exertion. After a long while, she asked in a low voice, if I were also captured by Bad Bear, would Dad be sad? That's more than just sad. Li Qingming held her in front of him and made a crying face. My father won't be able to eat or sleep. He will cry and cry thinking about you every day. This worried Pei Zulu so much that he wiped the non-existent tears on Li Qingming's face with his small hands. Dad, you can't cry, I will be so sad. When a man takes on the role of father from the role of husband to the new role of father, he really can't bear the little feminine offensive of his own little cotton-padded jacket. Dad, I understand. After comforting Li Qingming, Pei Zulu rolled his eyes and said as if to take credit, we ate the rabbit, we will be very happy, but the mother rabbit will be very sad. Children can be taught. Li Qingming nodded, and just as he was about to rub her head as a reward, he heard the little guy mutter again, but Tutu is really good. Yes, the road is long and difficult. The truth is like this, we think things are normal, but they make them sad, and vice versa. Li Qingming closed the book. There are too many things in the world that are difficult to distinguish between right and wrong, because they all have different perspectives. No matter how those demons slaughtered mortals, monks did this kind of thing very well. Realizing that his words were too profound for the little guy, Li Qingming added, the demon may not be bad, but it is difficult for a monk to like the demon. Do you mean to be annoying? Li Qingming gently chinned his head, unaware that the little guy in his arms had a bit of sadness under his lowered eyes. It's getting late. After Li Qingming finished handling the trivial things he had accumulated these days in the study, he stretched his body, turned his head and strangely saw the little guy lying on the soft couch with his eyes squinting. He looked dazed and his face was red and hot. The tears on his face were glistening. He touched it hurriedly, and was even more shocked. The face, which still had baby fat, was as hot as a stove. Baby, what's wrong with you? Tell Daddy. Even though Li Qingming was usually in a calm mood when things happened, he was as panicked as a headless fly at this moment, and suddenly lost his sense of proportion. Hearing his voice, the little guy struggled to open his eyelids and just shook his head. Ah, Dad, I'm so sleepy. Isn't there any discomfort? Li Qingming still couldn't let go. No, it's just that I'm sleepy. The little guy muttered, and he didn't forget to pat Li Qingming's cheek with his little hand, but he didn't have the strength to raise it. No, Dad, don't worry. Her appearance made Li Qingming even more panicked. Logically speaking, the little guy is unlikely to get sick like ordinary people, but the monk's disease is even more frightening. Just when he was panicking, Pei Zinan, who had changed into ordinary white clothes, suddenly appeared and said in a calm voice, Pei Zulu, it's time to take a medicinal bath today. And when she finished speaking, Li Qingming found that the little guy suddenly wrinkled his face, and buried his head directly into his chest in grievance, pretending not to hear, and his breathing was still so heavy. Pei Zulu. Pei Zinan's voice was a little colder, which made the little guy tremble and bury his head deeper. Seeing this inexplicable scene, Li Qingming was heartbroken. He turned to Pei Zinan and said, she is still young, so she is not in a hurry to take a medicinal bath. Is she sick? Pei Zinan ignored it, walked forward and pulled the little guy out of Li Qingming's arms. When he found out that he had left Li Qingming's arms, Pei Zulu burst into tears and cried weakly, Daddy, Daddy, I don't want to take a medicinal bath, I don't want. Li Qingming felt distressed and weird at the same time. Today's Enchantress Lengdi seemed a little unkind. The little guy's symptoms were also strange, and his reaction to hearing about taking a medicinal bath was a little too extreme. Nowadays, the recipes for medicated baths are all kinds of strange, but they are not as painful as described in the novels he read in his previous life. They are often used to highlight how extraordinary the protagonist's will is. After numerous improvements, medicated baths are more physically and mentally comfortable than bathing. Except for some exceptions, they still cause strong physical pain. Li Qingming didn't know what kind of medicated bath Pei Zinan mentioned, and he didn't think she would really give the little guy a prescription with strong side effects. Most of the time, the little guy was still young and tired of medicated baths, but he just felt distressed. No real father can hear his daughter crying like this and not feel heartbroken. Pei Zinan, can't you just stop today? Didn't you see that your daughter is sick? Are you hiding something from me? For the sake of the little guy, Li Qingming showed a bit of weakness in front of Pei Zinan for the first time, but with an incomparable toughness. But Pei Zinan remained unmoved, with a pair of cold eyes showing no emotion. He just carried the little guy into another room, where there was already a bathtub made of black ice, exuding an odor. Wisps of ice-cold breath. She bent down and ruthlessly pulled off Pei Zulu's little hand that was tightly holding her clothes, and hung it above the tub. The tears of her biological daughter did not seem to arouse Pei Zinan's sympathy at all. She said coldly, it's your choice whether to do it or not. Pei Zulu stopped crying. his already red and bloodshot eyes glanced at the invisible ice cubes that looked like an abyss, then turned to stare at Li Qingming for a moment, and then pushed Pei Xinan's hand away. With a splash, a little splash of water was frozen into ice crystals by the cold air, and then fell down. Perhaps the liquid was too cold, so the little guy's barely able to stop crying suddenly echoed in the room, and then continued to sob. Pain. Dad, it hurts. It hurts. Dad, I feel so, it hurts so much. Hug, hug. Dad, I want a hug. Li Qingming's heart almost burst when he heard this. Tears appeared on his face at some point, and he stepped forward to pick up the little guy without saying a word. But what made Li Qingming strange was that even though he had already stretched out his hand, the little guy retracted his fluttering arms, stopped even crying, and only looked at Li Qingming with a pair of tearful eyes. Pei Xinan. Li Qingming turned around, as if he wanted to get angry. Pei Xinan, whose eyes were full of coldness just now, did not stop him, but stared coldly with her beautiful eyes. Forget it before, now you are still hiding it from me. No matter what disease the little guy has or needs a special medicinal bath, I am qualified to know. Pei Xinan said nothing, but looked up at the night sky outside the courtyard. The dark clouds dispersed, and the full moon hanging high in the night sky suddenly appeared. The entire courtyard was also illuminated brightly by the clear moonlight, which complemented her exquisitely beautiful face. After a long while, she spoke softly. Li Qingming, your daughter is not sick and does not need any physical conditioning. She just needs to suppress the demon power in her body on the 15th day of every month to prevent her from being unable to maintain her human form. Go to the demonic power of riding a horse. It's true that you are a demon, but you are actually a demon. Li Qingming was rarely controlled by anger, but turned around and pursed his lips tightly because of the scene in front of him. Under the bright moonlight, Pei Xinan's impeccable eyebrows and eyes still seemed to be carved from natural jade, showing their agility and beauty, but a pair of plush-pointed fox ears actually stood on his ears. The voice gradually became faint and ethereal. You. Li Qingming was stunned. When he looked again, he actually saw 9 shadows behind Pei Xinan, swaying slowly. Snow White Fox Tail. Chapter 31. The shadows swaying on the ground like clusters of tails, and Pei Xinan's silver thread stained with hoarfrost under the moonlight, all made Li Qingming fall into a stagnant state of delirium. The enchantress Pei Xinan is as gorgeous as the night but as seductive as the night. No one can figure out her thoughts, and every aspect of her actions reveals the enchantment. No one has ever connected her with a demon. As Li Qingming knows, the gap between humans and demons cannot be diluted by time. There are even extreme demon-killing alliances active everywhere, just to completely wipe out this ethnic group. Such a stunning and talented woman must be from the human race. Li Qingming took a deep breath. Whether it was Pei Xinan's revealed demonic features or the vigorous but restrained demonic aura around him, they all warned him over and over again. She is not only a demon, but also an ancient demon emperor with an extremely pure bloodline. Once he accepted this fact, Li Yuan felt that all the previous confusions would make sense. In just 2 or 3 years, how did Pei Xinan leap to a level of cultivation that others could achieve in decades or hundreds of years? Li Qingming is already stunning and talented, but he is still outdone by Pei Xinan. Why does the martial arts practiced by a majestic and peerless demon witch have such an abnormal and deadly shield? All this is because she, Pei Xinan, is a fox demon. Can demons and humans be the same race track? Why is such a smart little guy even dumber than a mortal child in some aspects, and why is his body so amazing? And again, Pei Zulu had the habit of rubbing his head against him to express intimacy and pleasure. Isn't it just a young fox? Just like the little fox ears she was showing at the moment, paired with her long black hair, she was a little fox girl through and through. The facts in front of him were so shocking that Li Qingming, whose thoughts were mixed in his heart, could not help but remain silent for a long time. When he raised his head again, he met Pei Xinan's eyes with a dark golden light. It seems to be colder than before. Pei Xinan, who had remained silent, pursed his blood-burning red lips and said loudly, "Are you so frightened that you can't speak? Li Qingming, you are really becoming more and more timid as you live." The contempt and frivolity revealed in her tone made Li Qingming feel that he was back to the time when they first met. Scared, I was scared. But scared, not really at all. If outsiders knew that Pei Xinan, the demon sect demon girl, was in the form of a fox demon, the definition of a peaceful practice would be in turmoil. Coupled with the news that he, the former true successor of Jojo Palace, had a daughter with her, as expected, the storm will turn into a bloody storm, and the situation on all sides will be turned into a mess. But Li Qingming really didn't think there was anything to be afraid of. At worst, he could just write a headline in several newspapers in the world of cultivation that he controlled, "Yes, we have a child." Then just leave the Jojo Palace openly, no one can stop him from doting on his daughter anyway. I don't care about other things. Li Qingming looked calm, bypassed Pei Zinan and walked straight to the Xuanbing barrel. He picked up the little one and wiped the potion off her body with a clean towel. No matter what, whether her surname is Pei or mine, she is my daughter, Li Qingming, and no one can change this. Quote. Then he met Pei Zinan's eyes again, and his tone became colder, including you, the mother-in-law. Li Qingming did not ask Pei Zinan why he didn't tell him about this earlier. It was undoubtedly the stupidest behavior to dwell on the past. He had always been accustomed to focusing on his feet and looking to the future. The little guy just stopped crying and felt that something was wrong in the atmosphere. I used to hear my mother-in-law say that couples love to quarrel and fight the most. It was only now that she saw her father and mother quarreling. She should have felt interesting and curious, but now she felt very sad for some reason. Even the fox ears on both sides were stretched out. She thought it was her crying that caused the quarrel between the two. "Ah, Daddy," Pei Zulu called timidly, with some caution, "can you let me go back to the bucket?" Li Qingming lowered his head, his face full of confusion. "I will be good in the future and will not make my father angry again." Li Qingming opened his mouth to speak. How could he be angry with this little guy? But when he saw Pei Zulu's tearful eyes, he, a grown man, couldn't say a word. "Is it because I have no hands or feet?" Pei Zinan's words were not as gentle as Li Qingming's. The little guy struggled and jumped to the ground. Then he kicked off his two little legs and grabbed the edge of the Xuanbing jade bucket that was taller than her, grunted again and crawled in. After revealing his demonic form, the little guy who was feeling hot and groggy just now has completely woken up. The power contained in his little body has undergone a qualitative change, but the energy in his body is quite disordered. After falling into the liquid, she couldn't help but cry, and then she stopped immediately. As long as it lasts on weekdays, it will take as long as today. Pei Zinan's tone was always cold, just like the cold breath that had not dissipated even after she disappeared. The little guy also responded obediently with a cry, "I know, Auntie." The room became quiet again. "Can Dad stay with you here?" "Okay." Li Qingming took a while before speaking. After calming down, he also knew that the little guy must have had something that he didn't know about because of the union between the two of them. The situation will attack every full moon night. This medicinal bath was not prepared casually, but was specifically designed to stop this situation and restore the little guy to his human form again. "Okay, hiss," Pei Zulu responded, but when he opened his mouth, he couldn't help but gasp, which made Li Qingming's heart tremble. He didn't know that in these days, the little guy in front of him might have suffered a lot more than he thought. "Does it hurt?" "It doesn't hurt," the little guy said, but he was hit by the coldness everywhere around him and shivered violently, followed by bursts of bone-breaking pain. She wanted to cry, but she covered her mouth with her little hands. Having made Li Qingming angry just now, Pei Zulu didn't want to say anything anymore. And in the next second, she discovered that her father had entered the black ice jade bucket at some point, and held her in his arms, with a ferocious and gentle smile on his face. "Ah, Daddy." The pain was within his tolerance, but he couldn't control the facial muscles to react. "Get out quickly, Daddy, get out quickly, you have to soak in it all night, it hurts." The little guy pushed Li Qingming anxiously. She had to soak in this kind of medicinal bath all night long. "She will feel bad. It's just one night, Dad said I'll stay with you." Pei Zulu's little face was stunned, and then he burst into tears and said with sobs, "Ah, Dad. Can you please, don't hate me." "How could I hate you? But I am a demon. How can a person like a demon? What if you don't want me anymore, Dad?" Just a word, Li Qingming's heart seemed to be blocked by something, and he couldn't speak anymore. He just realized that all the abnormalities in the little guy tonight were due to the fear of being disliked by him because of his identity as a demon. Just like those stray pet dogs, once someone feeds them for a long time, they will become very well behaved and will wag their tails when they see people, but no one can take them away, or it is very difficult. Under its docile appearance, it is actually wary. Other people don't know how, but Daddy will always like you. Li Qingming wiped away the endless tears on the little guy's face. Really, really. Pei Zulu held on to Li Qingming's clothes, seemingly forgetting the pain, fearing that Li Qingming would shake his head. Then Daddy, can you hook me up with me? Hook. Li Qingming bent his little finger and hooked it with the little finger that was only the size of a piece of water spinach. If you hang yourself with a hook, my father will always like the little guy in 1,000 or 10,000 years. 1,000, 10,000 years. The little guy's eyes slowly lit up, tears were still flowing, but a bright smile bloomed on his face. I will always like Dad. The night passed without incident, and the day dawned. Suddenly there was a soft murmur outside the window that was so low that no one could hear it, but it was covered up by the light trembling of a bird landing on a branch early in the morning. Li Qingming, do you really regard her as your own flesh and blood? Li Qingming stayed with the little guy in the house all night, but Pei Zinan also stood outside all night. It's really not what it used to be. Li Qingming put the little guy to sleep and sat down at the desk. He couldn't help but rub his forehead. Staying up all night didn't make him feel tired. Instead, he soaked in the medicinal solution overnight, and now he felt energetic. But if you are too full, you will feel tired, a bit exhausted, and you will not be able to close your eyes and fall asleep like a little guy. In that state, you may have to sleep for several days. He spread out a blank book, picked up the pen on the table and gradually fell into deep thought. This is a habit he has developed since his previous life. Now that he knew Pei Zinan's identity as a demon and the demon blood of the little guy, he naturally needed to take precautions and make some preparations in advance. But the more important thing is how to make up for the invisible gap caused by his absence from the little guy these years. Pei Zinan is also indispensable. Li Qingming guessed that she must have encountered some trouble before sending the little guy to her side. What happened last night might also be some kind of test. Li Qingming may not have been able to understand it before last night, but if he switches positions now, what he will do will not be so simple. The barrier between demons and humans is a chasm built with the flesh and bones of countless ancestors. How can Pei Zinan be sure that he, Li Qingming, will not change his face after knowing the truth? Where does this witch get her confidence in me? Li Qingming had some subtle emotions in his heart, but he didn't pay much attention to it. Who in the world could figure out what this witch was thinking? Can humans and demons coexist harmoniously? Li Qingming wrote such a question on the page, and then said to himself, actually, it's not impossible. As far as he knew, the demon clan who had cultivated and recuperated in the secret territory of the demon clan over the years had gradually begun to move around the world of cultivation, and had also established connections with some sects and started to communicate with each other. The blood feud of the past has now slowly faded away with the souls of those ancestors. Not to mention letting go of everything in the past, but each can also be vigilant and achieve a win-win situation in some aspects. Especially some of the treasures of heaven, materials and earth that are unique to the secret territory of the monster clan. Even Jojo Palace purchased a batch and tried to cultivate them, but they all ended in failure. The medicinal plants in both worlds cannot survive in the outside world, but they are indispensable resources for both sides. This situation is actually equivalent to the prerequisite for peace between the two sides. Li Qingming remembered that his master had clearly mentioned that the higher-ups of the Jojo Palace sect had this intention, but as the leader of the righteous path, they had too many rules to consider. Perhaps in a few decades or hundreds of years, we will really be able to see a prosperous scene of transvestites. But Li Qingming really doesn't want to wait. The little guy is so worried that he won't like her because of travel and prejudice. Is it possible that he has to make her wait for tens or hundreds of years? It has to subtly change the inherent cognition of most people. Li Qingming thought quietly, and his eyes couldn't help but stop on the bookshelves filled with books from the bookstore under his name. The most shameless means of aggression is ideological invasion. Li Qingming suddenly smiled, holding the pen and hovering over the paper. With a mischievous smile, it's time for the monks in this world to experience what sadomasochism is. The Legend of White Snake. He wrote the title of the book and then started writing like a god. He has been able to write so many miscellaneous readings over the years. According to the impression in his memory, he wrote a work that people can't put down, but it is not too simple. In his previous life, he would have been a master-level copywriter. Looking at the golden bowl as big as a mountain falling from the sky, covering his wife with wet tears on her face, Xu Xian's heart seemed to be imprisoned in the dark and lightless hell with her. Beside him, a green snake quietly climbed onto his wrist. Li Qingming wrote most of the plot of the magically adapted version of White Snake in one breath, and then conveniently left a hook at the end of this paragraph. As an author, how can you end without leaving a hook? After a rough tour of the previous plot, Li Qingming is full of confidence. I can only rely on my emotional writing skills to prevent the female monk from bursting into tears and make the male monk also want to marry a monster wife. Even if I lose. Just as he was about to leave it to Uncle Fu to go to the bookstore, Pei Xinan's voice sounded faintly behind him. I haven't seen enough yet. Sit down and continue writing for me. Can you stop walking silently every day? You are a demon, not a ghost. Li Yuan, who was suddenly startled, naturally had no good temper. I'm tired, so I won't write anymore. I want to see when I'm free. Funny, do you really think readers can threaten a dog author like him? Dreaming. How could Pei Zinan be cheating? As soon as the shadow in front of his eyes flashed, Li Qingming realized that Pei Zinan had already sat on the desk, with his legs on both sides of his shoulders. As long as he gets closer, he can see the peach blossom garden. But Pei Xinan's unkind tone made him temporarily put aside some of his charming thoughts, as this green snake also a monster. What do you think? Li Qingming was hard-pressed for a while, then suddenly he heard another sound, almost breaking into a cold sweat. The hilt of the sword was stepped on by the witch again. Li Qingming, if you fart, just let it go. Li Qingming stood firm and still, but did not dare to look directly into Pei Xinan's eyes that seemed to be on fire. This witch is going to eat people again. This heartless man named Shu has a white snake, and by Susan is not enough. Do you want to raise a green snake? The coldness in Pei Xinan's words was like a severe winter wind and snow. Or are you writing about yourself? Listen to me, don't use your feet. Li Qingming had a difficult time saying that he had no choice but to bow his head because the leverage was at his feet. But there was a bright and dangerous smile on Pei Xinan's face. You can't even please me, you still want to find me. As a human being, the desire for control is indispensable in his bones. But if you add some paranoia and strength, it can't be explained by the 3 words, desire for control. It has reached a pathological level. Just like Pei Zinan, whose smile was like a rippling water, she was so beautiful that she could make a man fall in love with her at a glance, but it made Li Qingming suddenly feel breathless, as if he had returned to the dark cave a few years ago. My limbs seemed to be bound by heavy chains again, and the sound of bells tinkled again in my ears. Li Qingming's face turned red, thinking of him as a majestic young swordsman, the #1 true successor of Jojo Palace, and a future giant of righteousness. Although these are all in the past tense, they cannot be humiliated by a witch like this. What's more, it's still used. Pei Zinan, why are you so crazy? Li Qingming tried his best to put on a serious expression with hatred as deep as the sea, but he lost the determination he had a few years ago. This appearance actually made Pei Zinan chuckle a few times. Mister, you have such a tough mouth, but your body is too honest, right? I think my husband, this green snake, even if I raise it, is still full of ambition but not enough power. Hearing that she was still upset, Li Qingming really hit the cotton wool with a punch. A completely fictitious story had to be projected into reality with various associations. Isn't this just looking for trouble? What? As soon as you heard that I wanted to find a new love, you, a jealous woman, couldn't help it. When you go out, your identity is given by yourself. Family status is also achieved by oneself. Li Qingming, who has always been tough, raised his chin and said, a witch like you can only be a concubine in the future, bringing me tea and water, making my bed and washing my feet. In a few words, Pei Zinan became the maid with the highest status in that kind of family, but the smile on her face became brighter and brighter, and she said delicately, whatever my husband wants me to do, I will do whatever I want. All slaves will obey my husband. But it's not just words that are delicate. After a moment, Li Qingming suddenly pursed his lips and turned his head, not daring to look at her again. Pei Zinan drew back his foot and said with a hint of disgust in his tone, "Are you worthy of being called a righteous monk? Li Qingming, you are really despicable." He. Li Qingming pretended that nothing happened and could only respond with a sneer, but his toes were almost digging out of the 3 rooms and 1 living room. Then, I had no choice but to wash up again in broad daylight and come back refreshed and sit down at my desk. Once the sage mode is turned on, writing becomes more like a god. With the appearance of Shao Qing, the overall tone of the plot becomes more and more sad. The entanglement between the shepherd boy and the white snake in Xu Xian's previous life adds some fateful complications to this sadomasochistic relationship. In the eyes of others, it will be a love that can be praised and cried, but in the eyes of Pei Zinan, it means something else. I have been practicing for thousands of years just to repay my kindness, but I still end up being locked under the Lifeng Pagoda. Isn't this Bai Susan a fool? We are ready to flood the Jinshan mountain, but we still have to take into account the kindness of those women. They deserve to end up like this. There is also Xu Xian, who is indecisive and has nothing but good intentions. Li Qingming, what nonsense are you writing? Release Bai Susan from Lifeng Pagoda quickly and kill everyone. Quote. Listening to Pei Zinan's ramblings, Li Qingming felt that she was much more alive than before, but he was very annoyed. Can you please be quiet and don't look at it if you don't like it? When did I ask you to point fingers here? Although it is a modified story based on the legend of White Snake in the original world, every stroke comes from his hand and falls on his paper. That is his original world. You witch, can you stop having such a strong sense of empathy? I give you the pen, you will write. Li Qingming handed the pen over to him, but Jie Yu was paralyzed and smashed it. After being scolded by him, Pei Zinan narrowed his eyes slightly, naturally feeling angry in his heart, but he couldn't get angry, and finally stopped talking. Rarely having the upper hand, Li Qingming couldn't help but let out a cold snort, and almost wrote down on the paper. No matter how arrogant or unruly you are, you have to be honest. And when it was written that Bai Susan gave birth to a daughter, Pei Zinan couldn't help but speak, with no trace of sarcasm, I was wondering why a man like Xu Xian is so familiar. It turns out to be you. Li Qingming, you underestimate the demon clan too much. Do you really think that with just one life-saving grace, you can let the great demon take care of your body and mind and give birth to children? I thought it would be such a masterpiece, but it turned out to be just a vulgar book. Okay, when I read the novel, I saw that it was a little bit different. Li Qingming paused and said angrily, don't talk about Bai Susan, isn't that what you are? What? Pei Zinan was stunned for a moment. Because of the 1,000-year life-saving grace, Bai Susan, who wanted to achieve perfection, committed herself to the ordinary Xu Xian and even gave birth to children for him. Because of the grace of saving his life, she, a witch, hesitated to let him go. Li Qingming. He also has a daughter. Li Qingming, you are so courageous. Pei Zinan's tone suddenly became as cold as the heavy snow falling on the winter solstice. Such a stupid Bai Susan can have the grace of me. Hey, are you in a hurry? Li Qingming felt secretly happy and nodded perfunctorily, yes, yes, yes. How dare you arrange me like this? Who gave you the courage? Pei Ji said with cold eyes hidden in her south eyes. The previous book, The Witch of the Demon Gate, was still within her tolerance, so she spared Li Qingming. But this time, Li Qingming not only repeated his old tricks, but even made them worse. Don't you really think that I won't take this life of yours? Pei Zinan put his sword across Li Qingming's neck, with a look of indifference on his face. This time, even if you kneel down and beg me to spare your life, I will definitely chop off your head. Li Qingming, on the other hand, did not even have the slightest deviation in his writing and continued to write the subsequent story. The meaning should not be too obvious. Cut it as you like, if you have the ability, do it. It's all about Ji Mugen and Ji Mu Zhen. It's really a bit tiring to do this, but you can't offend him too much. If you have anything to say, please wait until I finish writing it. I just promised to write a new story for my daughter last night. Li Qingming added, giving Pei Zinan a step down. How could he not know that this witch seemed a little unkind, but in fact she valued the little guy more than anything else. Afraid of death, Pei Zinan commented like this, but he still put his sword back, his eyes returned to the page, and he became completely quiet. Li Qingming wrote very quickly, but she read a little slowly. When he saw that Xu Xian began to regret and was obsessed with rescuing Bai Susan, Pei Zinan's cold aura retreated slightly, and his eyes couldn't help but fall on Li Qingming's face. This is how it should be, and you Li Qingming should also beg for mercy from me. Quote. Li Qingming ignored it. The relationship between him and Pei Zinan was like a captured goshawk and a hawk boiler. Coupled with their respective personalities, it was impossible to have a harmonious scene. If he really ignored these innocuous words, he would lose. But the joy in Pei Zinan's heart quickly disappeared. Humans and monsters are different. Xu Xian also wanted to atone for the mistakes he had committed, and went to the Lei Feng Tower to say goodbye to Bai Susan affectionately, and finally passed away with a smile. Li Qingming came to an end and felt quite satisfied. There is nothing vulgar or noble about writing. As long as it can bring emotional resonance to people, it is art. But Pei Zinan's cold voice, as if coming from the abyss, sounded next to him. Li Qingming, if you dare to leave Pei Zulu behind, I will dig you out of the grave, whip your bones, imprison your soul, and torture you for 1,000 or 10,000 years. You can never escape from my grasp. Seeing Pei Zinan's killing intent, Li Qingming was stunned for a moment. No, I'm writing a story. Why are you so serious? Li Qingming never thought that Pei Zinan would be furious. But that's normal. How can a witch be determined? When I got the idea of playing tricks on others, I took one of my husband's slaves and his concubines. When he was slightly unhappy, he would refer to his subordinates as defeated generals, crotch playthings, slaves. Such highly insulting words were used to highlight the difference between the noble and the humble between the two people. Don't get nervous. Li Qingming said 4 words lightly, picked up some books on the table, straightened his clothes, and said, I'm going out for a while, and I'll probably be back before dinner. Such a gesture naturally made Pei Zinan frown coldly. It is clear that his life is in his own hands. How can you, Li Qingming, get the confidence? You even put on a show that you want me to obey your words. But before Pei Zinan could get angry, Li Qingming had already opened the door and left, leaving only a few drops of ink on the table. If the orgasm doesn't go away, why don't you just do mugwort acupuncture? Li Qingming is not stupid. My boss. Li Qingming just walked into the main store of his bookstore, and was greeted by the shopkeeper wearing a Confucian shirt. When he saw the book in his arms, his small and narrow eyes suddenly flashed with light, and he couldn't help but rub his hands. Did my boss have another new book coming out? When Li Qingming nodded, he held the book in his palm, as if he was holding something extremely sacred. Can it not be sacred? Do you really think this is an ordinary storybook? They are all shiny spiritual stones. He was originally just a poor old man who lived in a small bookstore in Linan City. Now he is the shopkeeper Lu Da, who is well known in the spiritual world. He is very aware of the value of every stroke of this former true disciple of Jojo Palace. It would be worth comparing it with 1,000 pieces of gold. Not enough respect for the former. Urgent, this book must be placed on the shelves of all branches under the name within 3 days. The price to dealers can be 50% lower than usual. The title of The Legend of White Snake must be sold in the shortest possible time. Get out, Li Qingming ordered seriously. I'll go and tell you now, and I'll bring the template to my boss for review later. Shopkeeper Lu agreed immediately. Even though Li Qingming's second half of the decision was almost impossible to save his capital, he had no objections. No matter how capable he is of eating a large bowl of rice, how many officials are in charge of what matters, how can a mature and sophisticated person like him displease his parents, not to mention that Li Qingming has never suffered a loss for him. By the way, Li Qingming stopped him. Which troupe in the city is the most powerful? The theater troupe. Shopkeeper Lu opened his eyes slightly. As a native of Linan City, he was very familiar with all the 8 sects and 9 streams in the city. He immediately said, when it comes to typhoon, the Hong family opera troupe is the most stable. When it comes to literary opera, it is the most stable. It's the best in Guiyuan, with several famous actors. As for martial arts, it's probably the married group, but... Seeing him being so showy, Li Qingming couldn't help but tilt his head, and then he saw a bit of ambiguity in Shopkeeper Lu's sly eyes, which a man would understand instantly. And if we talk about erotic drama, the girls in Quanfang Hall are all pitiful and delicate flowers. They can sing the tune, play the flute, recite poems and compose poems, and I heard they can also dance with swords. When he said this, shopkeeper Lu laughed twice. Li Qingming was also shocked when he heard that. A brothel is just a brothel, how come you are so versatile? City can play. However, there was no strange expression on his face. If the witch was secretly watching, wouldn't he have to hold on to the wall and leave tomorrow morning? No, Li Qingming, am a gentleman. At the same time, there was no trace of curiosity or yearning on Li Qingming's face, and shopkeeper Lu secretly thought it was a pity. How can men quickly form a deep friendship? Either he has experienced life and death, or he is just drinking some wine and cuddling his little waist. Even though he is already in his 60s this year, shopkeeper Lu really wants to make progress. My boss certainly doesn't look down on these vulgar fans, shopkeeper Lu laughed, then put on his serious look at work. My boss wants to find a theater troupe to turn this script into a play. Quote. Li Qingming had nothing to hide from this old man who was responsible for many of his businesses. He nodded in agreement. Quickly, the story about the fox demon and the scholar in the Chinese chat room will also be on the list. Just a little nod of his head made shopkeeper Lu's heart gradually become hot again. He had this idea early in the morning, and if he arranged the script into a drama, then his role as shopkeeper Lu would become even heavier. To make progress, you must make progress. Then I will go and talk to those old acquaintances tonight to see if any theater is willing to take action. Even if not, I will spend money to get them to take action. Then I will dig some corners, and I will definitely sell Li Family Theater. Let's do it. What Li Qingming admired the most about shopkeeper Lu was his drive. He patted him on the shoulder to encourage him. Thank you for your hard work, shopkeeper Lu. After leaving the bookstore, Li Qingming turned around and went to the clothing chain store under his name. The person in charge of the costume jewelry business is a charming middle-aged woman from a wealthy family. Li Qingming saved her once many years ago and now she has become one of his generals. As soon as she saw Li Qingming arriving, she could not wait to put the peach on her body into the former's hand and let him help carry it. Boss, why are you free to come to the store today? Faced with these coquettish words, Li Qingming put on a posture of saying, firmly say, no, in the face of temptation. He is a gentleman. Li Qingming. Sister Jasmine, please stop teasing me, Li Qingming said calmly, I have something important to talk about today. The beautiful woman named Chen Yayan put away some of her charm. She wanted to get close to Li Qingming, but she knew she was not qualified. I asked shopkeeper Lu to help me prepare a theater and plan to choreograph some plays myself. I have to worry about the costumes, Sister Chen, Li Qingming said simply. I can wait until Sister Yayan reads the play and decides on the style. Yes, but I need to order a batch of fox-ear headbands. Fox-eared hairband. Chen Yayan blinked the moist and charming eyes unique to a beautiful woman, and was a little confused for a moment. Objects such as hairbands and forehead wipes have always been sold in her jewelry store, and they are very popular. Whether they are fairies from Jojo Palace or eldest ladies in the city, they are all regular customers in the store. Who was Li Qingming who conceived the idea? Those styles are novel and beautiful. But this fox-ear headband always sounds a bit inconsistent. What does a good person look like when he wears fox demon ears on his head? It's related to the content of the play. I plan to give it as a small gift to the female spectators. The white and pink ones also look cute. Maybe it will set off a trend of cuteness in the future. Li Qingming came up with the words he had thought up early in the morning. Chen Yayan, who is quite business-minded, understood immediately after hearing this and couldn't help but sigh. I'm afraid I will never be able to learn this kind of thinking from my boss. In her opinion, this is another 100-year plan for Li Qingming's business map. But who could have known that Li Qingming was so busy just for the sake of the little ones at home? Parenting is actually a very profound knowledge. Li Qingming has never experienced what it's like to have a family with healthy parents, but maybe it can't be compared to the dean's mother who worked too hard and suffered an early hunchback. I don't know whether blindly beating and scolding pressure-based education can make children grow up, but it will definitely create some estrangement between the two parties that will last for years. Putting yourself in someone else's shoes may be the first and most important thing you should do as a parent. Now that my boss has a daughter, he is indeed much more profound. Seeing Li Qingming deep in thought, Chen Yayan couldn't help but joke, there are no clothes for children in the store, but there are quite a few suitable for the fairy in white. Do you want me to take some back to please her? Although Li Qingming didn't admit it personally, he always took that lovely little girl with him when he went out these days, and everyone who saw him thought about it. The masked fairy in white last time aroused their curiosity as to whether she was Li Qingming's Taoist companion. If so, whose daughter is so lucky? These days, I don't know how many ladies in the boudoir stay up all night, crying like they don't need money, Chen Yayan joked, and had already gotten up to help Li Qingming choose. Although she didn't know the preferences of the fairy in white, there were so many clothes in the store, none of them were ugly. Chen Yayan thought that if she picked more, she would always like something. Then I'll trouble Sister Yayan. Li Qingming did not refuse. Compared with Pei Zinan, who stole his master's clothes all day long and imitated Zhang Yunqing in wearing Xingyi for cosplay, it would be better to bring her some clothes back to a certain extent. Save him a headache. If my boss is really distressed, it would be a good idea to come see me more often. Chen Yayan covered her mouth and said with a smile. Seeing Chen Yayan twisting her mound-like hips and walking away, Li Qingming couldn't help but sigh. That's the only bad thing about being handsome. Not only is he noticed by all kinds of little girls, but the eyes of this pretty widow are even more so. It was clear that he wanted to eat him alive. While he was drinking tea and resting in the room, Chen Yayan was really choosing clothes carefully. After all, she was the shopkeeper in name, so she must not neglect giving gifts to the young madam. Long gauze gown, cheongsam rolled skirt. She picked out all the best-selling items in the store, and they were the high-end models that were not sold as samples. But this is not enough, Chen Yayan thought to herself, and walked to another interior decoration store with a mature figure. They are all people who have been there before. She understands things between men and women better than anyone else, and she understands how important the word interest is. Shopkeeper, what are you here to pick up? I'll do it myself. Chen Yayan waved the female waiters in the store to leave and went to choose by herself. If these little women really knew something, they would have to chew on their backs. Looking at the meager fabric interiors on the shelves, Chen Yayan narrowed her eyes with a smile, taking them one by one and putting them into her storage bag. These objects are loved by many noble ladies, and many of them even use them to regain the favor of the men in their families. It has also set off certain trends among women. Even if they are not worn for men to see, it is still great to wear for yourself. As a woman, sometimes the contrast between her face and her private life is so great that others cannot imagine it. The colder the person is on the surface, the less coquettish he becomes in private. Men, there is no one who doesn't love this piece. Some people may have all sorts of wild thoughts in their minds just by taking a glance at it. With this thought in mind, Chen Yayan even selected those styles that were difficult to put on the table, put them all into storage rings, and thoughtfully found an exquisite gift box to put inside. As a part-time worker, she really thinks about her employer. My boss, I picked some at random, and I don't know if they suit the fairy's wishes. Chen Yayan smiled and placed the gift box on the table in front of Li Qingming. Next time my boss will bring her to the store to choose for herself. I'll definitely do it next time. Li Qingming agreed, but had no such thoughts in his heart. Based on the unpredictable temperament of the seductress, Li Qingming was a little worried that if he really brought her here, he might have to place something in the cloakroom. It's totally fine to remove it and maybe use an affirmative sentence pattern. Thinking about it this way, it's really, no, why is it a bit exciting to think about it? Li Qingming hurriedly shook off these wandering thoughts, stood up and left. Funny, I am Li Qingming, how can I indulge in women every day? All the way home, Li Qingming first took a look at the sleeping little guy, but after searching around, he couldn't find Pei Zinan. He appears and disappears every day, so his legs should be broken. Li Qingming, standing under the old locust tree in the courtyard, babbled, but there was a slight ringing of bells in his ears. When he looked up, he saw the familiar pair of ankles hanging with red ropes, which were given a light and hazy luster under the afterglow of the setting sun. Swaying gently in the breeze, it looks like a divine creation falling on the sea of clouds and snow. This scene couldn't help but remind Li Qingming of the sibling friendship at noon. But he was soon forgotten by Li Qingming. This witch has disturbed my Taoist heart again. What are you doing sitting on the tree when you have nothing to do? He asked. You are a slave, How dare you question your master? Pei Zinan's voice returned to as cold as frost and snow, hanging down from the tree, his bare feet just parallel to Li Qingming's chin. As if it was going to be stuffed into his mouth. Li Qingming was almost immune to this. This witch wanted to prove that her status was higher than his own, and that she loved being on top. In any case, she is also his daughter's mother. Li Qingming took out the gift box from the storage ring and said, I brought you some clothes. Pei Zinan was stunned for a moment, but it was only for a moment, and then he ridiculed, finally, he has some self-consciousness as a plaything, and he also knows that it's time to please me. Dog witch. Li Qingming cursed in his heart and didn't bother to pay attention. He threw the box towards Pei Zinan with a wave of his hand. Pei Zinan, who was suddenly in a bright mood without realizing it, also bypassed Li Qingming's small rebellious move, followed him into the house, opened the gift box, and scolded him while looking at it. How can these clothes match me? Are you just fooling me with these? Quote. If Li Qingming ignores a word and lets this witch talk duplicity, you will become arrogant, and sooner or later, she will torture you severely. When Pei Zinan suddenly lost his voice, he subconsciously raised his head, and couldn't help but show a bit of embarrassment on his face. Pei Zinan's slender, jade-like onion-like fingers were seen picking up a few thin ribbons and small pieces of fabric upholstery, and there was also a small mountain of unspecified clothing piled beside it. TMD. Li Qingming's face darkened, and in front of him was Pei Zinan's playful and disdainful smile. The words coming out of those red lips made him turn off the microphone directly, and his handsome face couldn't help but turn red. Tisk. Li Qingming, you are such a coquettish person. Looking at the clothing interiors that Chen Yayan designed through his own first drafts or verbal descriptions, Li Qingming felt a sense of embarrassment as if he had accidentally posted a crude picture among his family members. Another male protagonist was reborn as a young man, selling QQ clothes there, and determined to become a world QQ tycoon. He just followed the example and inherited the will of his ancestors in the spiritual world. What's wrong? And the more he behaves like this, the more he becomes a fatal poison with a different kind of attraction. Just like when a little girl sees those exquisite and beautiful dolls for the first time, Pei Zinan just wants to hold them in her arms. Play around. Pei Zinan held a piece of clothing and looked at the bowl-like structure on it. He immediately understood how and where the interior was worn. You can make so many patterns with the albizia lapel. Li Qingming still has the nerve to say that he is a disciple of the righteous path. Compared with you, those prodigals in the Heihuan Zen sect are all pure and innocent. Thoughts determine conduct, and you, a witch, can only think of this level. Li Qingming deliberately turned cold and preached. These are small objects designed to reconcile conflicts between husband and wife, maintain a happy family, and make men and women happy. What does pleasure have to do with it? To a certain extent, this type of supplies really had this purpose, and Li Qingming didn't feel like he was making excuses. Oh, Pei Zinan's expression became even more playful when he heard this. My husband is dissatisfied with the slave family. Or, she paused, narrowed her eyes and asked, my family is already old and yellow, and my husband is tired of looking at this body of flesh and blood. Do you need these clothes to make my husband feel pity for my family? Quote. Li Qingming breathed out, thinking that this woman is really unreasonable sometimes, and her ability to find fault in an egg is a bit scary. Telling things in a smooth manner suddenly became annoying to him, and it sounded like he had done something outrageous. Who should Li Qingming look for to reason with? I bought you new clothes and they're still cluttered. Don't forget about it. Li Qingming immediately broke the jar and threw it, pretending to take all the clothes back. How could Pei Zinan be willing? He glared coldly and said, take your stinky hands away from me and come over and loosen my clothes. I will come if you ask me to. Li Qingming pouted, but still walked over and unbuckled the rope very skillfully, took off Pei Zinan's coat, and then watched her pick and choose. What's the use of this thin ring? For decoration, Li Qingming glanced at the decoration in front of him, which was considered unique among girls, and cursed Chen Yayan in his heart. Forget about anything else, how could this witch see this thing and use it herself? I just want to hang it around his neck. As expected, Pei Zinan asked, how can I hold you without a chain? Dog witch. Li Qingming cursed in his heart, and saw Pei Zinan taking some stockings, and asked, where is this fishnet-like tool used? Looking at the material of these clothes, they can't be described as shoddy. I didn't expect that even you. Li Qingming also means no evil and no business. Quote. Li Qingming didn't respond, looking unconcerned. How could a layman know the ropes? There are two most important points about this type of clothing. First, the material must be light and thin, not only to be skin-friendly and refreshing, but also to highlight the translucent hazy texture. Second, it would be better if the material were always inferior. It can not only bring customers the most perfect use experience, but also promote customers' secondary consumption. Seeing that Li Qingming was deliberately silent, Pei Zinan was not angry and continued to play with himself. There is no woman who does not love these novel and unique costumes. Especially beautiful women who are extremely confident in their appearance and figure, because confidence also implies narcissism, not to mention these clothes can really highlight the gracefulness of their figures, and the same is true for Pei Zinan. But for the moment, I wasn't sure what the gauze was for. To be more precise, I had the idea of playing with Li Qingming again. How do you wear this? She asked. Wear them as socks. Li Qingming looked serious. He had no intention of seeing this witch wearing black stockings. He is definitely not a stocking and leg control guy. I'm stupid, I want my husband to teach me how to dress. But when Pei Zinan gently threw it in his face, Li Qingming couldn't help but take another look. In terms of beauty, she, Pei Zinan, was one of the best. In her previous life, she was a queen-like big sister. He couldn't imagine how beautiful this enchantress would look in it. Don't you have any hands? After all, Li Qingming still couldn't lose face, he was still such a gentleman, and the light fragrance that filled the tip of his nose made him feel slightly embarrassed. In the blink of an eye, he was sitting on the rosewood chair at the desk again. And in front of him was that piece of skin as white as snow, as if the white jade tofu would break if he blew harder. Ms. Sir, would you please put it on for me? Li Qingming hesitated for a few seconds, then suddenly snorted coldly and said, You are such a witch, you can't even put on your socks. It's really ridiculous. Pei Zinan didn't make any rebuttal, just smiled and looked at the duplicitous man in front of her, putting on her socks like a slave. Then he said as if he was frustrated, Have you learned it? I will teach you this time, but don't let me help you next time. Yes, Pei Zinan responded gently, unable to hide the narrowness in his eyes, but what? Just teach me, Mr. Xian. Why don't you let go of your slave's legs after teaching me? The tenderness in Pei Zinan's voice made anyone feel agitated after listening to it. As soon as he lowered his head, Li Qingming realized that his hand had not yet been removed from her lap. Even rubbing it. Ahem. Li Qingming coughed twice to cover up his guilty conscience and defended, I'm helping you smooth out your wrinkles. You know I always pursue perfection in my work. It's really not that I want to eat tofu, it's that this hand is suddenly out of my control. No, you still don't believe it, right? The slave family believes it. That's good, you know I, Li Qingming, am not such a person. That's right, Pei Zinan, smiling and cooperating with the performance, asked lightly and skillfully, then when will my husband take back his other hand? What other? Li Qingming was mid-sentence when he realized that his other hand was still restless. Why don't you obey orders? It's time to chop it up. This is not my intention. Li Qingming looked serious and asked Pei Zinan, Did you use any magic on me? Ha ha. Pei Zinan changed his tenderness from before and looked coldly at Li Qingming to see if there were any moves he hadn't used yet, but he felt a little proud in his heart. No matter how hard his bones are, Li Qingming will still bow to her pomegranate skirt. The atmosphere froze for a moment. Li Qingming coughed again and asked, There are white ones over there, don't you want to try them? One of the solid colors is also good. As monks, we must not miss the opportunity to understand the yin and yang Tao. The witch wears stockings, so moist. In the end, Li Qingming got his wish and experienced the quality of his own products. The price is that there are half a red footprint on the face and the waist is slightly sore. But it's normal. When it comes to market research, you will always encounter some minor troubles. Calculate the time, it flies so fast. Li Qingming held the clasp of the drawer next to the table. I didn't even have time to read Master's last letter. Rather than saying that it was too late to see it, it would be more appropriate to say that there was no chance to see it. Li Qingming didn't want the elusive Pei Zinan to snoop even this little bit of privacy. After a hearty battle just now, he also sensed that the energy fluctuations in Pei Xinan's body were about to break through again. This time, Li Qingming finally had some privacy. As the drawer was opened, envelopes that had been neatly arranged one after another were revealed, without even a wrinkle. This shows how precious the recipients are to these envelopes. Over the past 2 years, Li Qingming's collection of envelopes has almost reached hundreds. Sometimes his master might send back several envelopes in a month. Compared with the news about the treasures of the secret realm, she actually mentioned more interesting things along the way, or used the photo stone to record many fairyland-like beautiful scenery and some daily thoughts. Regarding the dangers encountered, not a word was mentioned, or other words were used instead of prevarication. She was busy looking for ways to help Li Qingming rebuild his foundation, but she didn't want to worry him. The master and apprentice have been together for nearly 20 years and have long regarded each other as the closest people. Xiao Lizzie, have you been thinking about your teacher lately? When he opened the envelope and saw this sentence, Li Qingming couldn't help but smile more on his face, as if that smart and naive person was whispering in his ear. You are eating well every day, right? If I see you lose weight when I come back, I will teach you a lesson according to the rules of Xian Peak. Master, I heard from Uncle Fu that you have lost a lot of weight because of your busy business. HMPH, how dare you disobey Master? In fact, the age difference between the two is not that big, not to mention that as Li Qingming gets older, he gradually awakens the memories of his previous life. The master and disciple have always been led by him as the disciple. This even made his master emphasize the word, teacher, every time he opened his mouth. He also gave Li Qingming the nickname, Little Plum, and he was often as childish as a child. After talking about these concerns, the content of the letter also changed. As for those fools in the sect who always want to bully you, you are not allowed to pay attention to them. Write down their names one by one in a small book, and when your master comes back, you can visit them one by one. You really think that my apprentice, Xian Peak Yu Baiwei, is easy to bully, don't you? Li Qingming smiled, still thinking about this matter when he was away from home. He didn't know whether he should be moved or helpless, but his heart felt much more stable and calm. No matter what, there are always people in the world who will always miss him. By the way, I still have 2 pieces of good news to tell you. One is good and one is bad. Which one do you want to listen to first? Want to hear the good news first? No, I want to tell you the bad news first. Li Qingming raised his eyebrows and looked at the so-called bad news seriously. I was a teacher in the last secret realm but returned without success. Seeing the bad news, Li Qingming breathed a sigh of relief. He thought the stupid master was injured. He continued reading. The good news is, this secret realm gave me a big surprise. My master will be able to come back to avenge you soon. Are you happy? Li Qingming was naturally happy, not because his master Yu Baiwei finally found some magical elixir that could help him rebuild his foundation, but because he could finally see her return. But the sentence at the end of the envelope made the smile on Li Qingming's face freeze. You should go and take a look at the beautiful clothes in my teacher's room from time to time, so you don't get bitten by any mice. It's a magic circle, and it's a wardrobe made of extremely rare materials. Not to mention mice, not even ashes can fall off. But the key thing is, I don't know how many of his master's clothes are in Pei Xinan's. Li Qingming thought about it for a moment, and his scalp suddenly became numb. He couldn't go to Pei Xinan and say directly, Ellie, take off Pinru's clothes and give them back to me. Let alone wait for his master Yu Baiwei to come back and say to her, Pinru, your clothes have been borrowed by Ellie for a few days, you won't be angry, right? Difficult. Li Qingming's head was getting bigger, and he just wanted to seize the time to order a batch of the same style and put them back. Anyway, he knew all the sizes. What makes him even more embarrassed now is how to explain the little guy's life experience to his master. And, can she, Yu Baiwei, beat Pei Xinan? It's not about cultivation, but the means. The gap between the two is like high-end green tea and cute silly sweet. The latter restrains the former to some extent, but she is still the one who suffers no matter how much she wants. Just when Li Qingming was troubled by the lack of a solid solution, the slight sound coming from the house next door made him suppress these miscellaneous thoughts for the time being. The little guy woke up. But when he gently opened the door and walked into the house, he didn't see the little guy jumping on him with a warm and excited expression like usual, wrapping himself in the quilt like a hedgehog. Like a statue. Li Qingming suddenly felt mixed emotions in his heart. He clearly pretended to sleep again after hearing his footsteps. It was probably because of the fox demon blood in her body that she was making things difficult for herself again. It is true that children are innocent and carefree, but because they have not experienced the world, their minds are quite sensitive. The sun is shining on your butt, why don't you get up? Li Qingming spoke tentatively, but received no response. My dad has made a lot of food, and I'm waiting for you to wake up and eat together. Li Qingming said seductively. Upon hearing this, the hedgehog in the quilt rumbled a few times, and then calmed down again. Li Qingming felt that it would not be a problem to continue the stalemate like this, so he reached out and patted the quilt. Dad, I saw you moved. The little guy still didn't move. After a while, Li Qingming heard a muffled response, I didn't move. Look, you've already spoken. I didn't say anything. I was just talking in my sleep. Yes, Dad was wrong. Li Qingming followed Pei Zulu's wishes and said seductively, you must be starving after sleeping for several days. Can we eat first? No, not hungry. Seeing that this method didn't work, Li Qingming had no choice but to take out the things he got back from Chen Yayan today and sighed, do you not like Daddy? No. The little guy's voice suddenly became more emotional and panicked. But you don't even want to look at Dad. Li Qingming's tone was completely depressed. No. The little guy became even more anxious. Then why don't you pay attention to Daddy? Li Qingming was persuasive. Some things should be told by the child himself in order to eliminate unnecessary emotions faster. Pei Zulu hesitated several times before saying in an inaudible voice, I don't want my father to see me like I am now. With a hint of crying, Li Qingming knew that she must be wiping tears again now. Why? After a while, Pei Zulu responded, ugly. How could it be ugly? It's ugly. The little guy in the quilt purred again, but found that the corner of the quilt had been lifted, so he hurriedly held his head with his hands, trying to block the pair of fox ears on his head. But she was immediately picked up by Li Qingming. Then you mean to say that Dad is also ugly? You really don't like Dad anymore? No. Pei Zulu raised his head in panic, trying to defend himself. She was so jealous of her father. But the next second he was stunned. On her father Li Qingming's head, there was also a pair of plush snow-white fox ears, which were not much different from the ones on her head. Nonsense. Li Qingming took this opportunity to wipe away the tears on the little guy's face with his fingers, and pinched her upturned ears. With such beautiful fox ears, what's so ugly about them? It's much prettier than Daddy's. In this life, from the moment they are born, they are trapped in a lifelong cycle of comparison. When you are still young, you may not be able to appreciate the sourness of it. At most, you will only find your parents scolding annoying, angry, and sad. The beginning of truly realizing the difference between you and others is more about self-discovery. At the kindergarten stage, they may wonder, why do other people's homes have so many toys that they can't fit in a box? Why do other parents drive cars to pick up and drop off when it rains, and why can they go to KFC McDonald's amusement park every day? Why are the clothes and shoes worn by the classmates all new and beautiful, and even the school bags are so exquisite that I can't envy them? As age increases, this gap will become more obvious, and some people will become more and more dull in their temperament at this stage, just because of the low self-esteem accumulated bit by bit. These are all external matters. For the little one, the loss and grievance she feels comes from the gap between demon and human. Not only what I saw and heard, but also in all the stories, demons were hated and disliked. As much as she likes her father, Li Qingming, she hates the fox ears and tail on her body. What if my father finds out and hates me? This thought has been lingering in the little guy's mind for a long time. Whenever Li Qingming expresses all kinds of love for her, she can't help but feel worried. She is like a dandelion floating in the wind, traveling through mountains and rivers in all directions, but not knowing where to call home. That's why the little guy was so cautious and wanted to hear various promises from Li Qingming in a begging tone. This time she heard the answer she wanted most from her father. Pei Zulu would beg again in a different way next time. Again and again, tirelessly. It is precisely because of this that even though Li Qingming had never shown the slightest hint of boredom before, Peizulu still felt uneasy as soon as he opened his eyes. He pretended to be asleep and covered himself tightly with the quilt. She is greedy and playful, but what she wants from beginning to end is Li Qingming's favorite. How could Li Qingming not understand her little thoughts? He, who was born in an orphanage, could understand this emotion better. Those who are favored are always confident, and those who long to be loved are always worried about gains and losses. So he took advantage of this period of time to be busy, so he put on this fox-eared headband with a shame attribute at this time, just to let the little guy clearly feel that his father likes her. He expressed this even more with actions. How could Dad not like your pair of fox ears? Otherwise, a high-spirited man with a modest personality would do such a thing, let alone the dignified Jojo Palace Li Qingming. Do you really think grown men think this kind of headband looks good? They are just slaves to their daughters. Do you think this looks good on Dad? Li Qingming moved closer so that the little guy could see more clearly. Peizulu's eyes widened and he looked at her father's fake fox ears. He wanted to reach out his little hand to touch it, but then he raised it but took it back again. He pursed his lips and was speechless for a moment. Sure enough, it's not pretty enough. Li Qingming glanced at her and said in a low tone, which made Peizulu want to retort, but before she could speak, she heard Li Qingming's words with sincere envy. Actually, it can't be said that it doesn't look good. Even in front of the fluffy ears on your head, no matter how delicate and beautiful Dad's hairband is, it will not look good at all. Li Qingming said, taking away the small hairband at the same time. The guy was covering his ears with his other hand and praised, "Your ears are really beautiful." Comparing and admiring, Peizulu, who hated his fox ears very much, couldn't help but raise a question, are my ears really so beautiful? For women, blind praise is not as good as this kind of inadvertent contrasting praise. Abba is lying, Peizulu pouted and said, his expression still aggrieved, but his pair of fox ears that had been stretched out slowly stood up. How can it be? Seeing that he was almost coaxed, Li Qingming also held his little fox daughter with fox ears in his arms. If possible, I would love to touch your beautiful ears every day. Whenever the moon is full and the demonic energy leaks out, it is caused by her young age and being half demon and half human. With the conditioning of the medicinal bath, the external characteristics of fox ears and foxtail will slowly disappear within a few days. Really, really, the little guy's emotions came and went quickly. Sensing the real pity in Li Qingming's mouth, she couldn't help but twitch her fox ears, which was particularly cute. Of course, Li Qingming responded, he was indeed not lying. In the atmosphere of the internet in the past life, which boy dare not say that he drooled over the original paintings of the fox-eared girl in some games, and maybe even on a certain popular or orange app, specifically looking for such comic books to learn from. Even Pei Zinan's surprise when he transformed into a demon still remains in his mind. When facing this little fox girl of his, Li Qingming was filled with love and couldn't help but touch it with his fingers. When his fingertips touched the fluff on the little fox's ears, there were still tears on his face. Peizulu suddenly burst into laughter. The fox ears are also flapping like cattail fans, and the snow-white beard tail behind them is also sweeping like cotton. Itch, ang, it's so itchy. Li Qingming immediately retracted his hand, thinking that the novels and animations he had read before were really not a lie, and his eyes were attracted by foxtail. Just by looking at it, the little guy understood. He rubbed his head back and forth in Li Qingming's arms. The tail is also a tickle, Daddy can touch it if he wants. In response, Li Qingming just shook his head. No matter how intimate the father and daughter are, they still need to pay attention to the sense of boundaries. Peizulu didn't understand this. He just thought that his tail wasn't as beautiful as Pei Zinan's. Then I'll call my mother later and let my father touch my tail. It'll be fun. There are 4 in total, so 5. Quote. Hers wasn't fun enough, but her grandma's was fun enough. Li Qingming wanted to shake his head and refuse, but something was really moving in his heart. Those fake fox tails in the study materials were not as smart as Pei Zinan's that night. And there are still 9 in total. Li Qingming said that he was not curious, which was completely false. If he had the chance, he would definitely study it carefully. It wasn't that he had any improper thoughts, he said that he was just curious about the physical structure of the demon species. And, there's more, I have a secret that I haven't told Dad. The little guy stood up as if offering a treasure and came close to Li Qingming's ear. I'll just tell Dad that you are alone. As long as you pinch the middle tail of my mother, she will be obedient. Is there such a thing? Li Qingming wrote it down calmly. If it was taken seriously, it would not be easy to use as some unknown weapon against the witch. Treat me like XN every day. Watch me pinch your tail and make you call me master. Kneel down and give me. My thoughts went wrong, my thoughts went wrong. Li Qingming stopped these miscellaneous thoughts and finally managed to untie most of the knots in the little guy's heart, but he still only had half of his foot across the threshold. Being a father is not easy, but being a good father is not as simple as he expected. A few grunts brought Li Qingming back to reality. It's the kind of sound you make when you're extremely hungry. Pei Zulu, whose mood had just changed from gloomy to heavy rain, had his fox ears hanging down on his head, and explained pitifully, I wasn't so hungry just now. She still remembered that she had repeatedly stressed that she was not hungry, but now that she thought about it, her face turned red and hot. Gulu gulu. Li Qingming took a breath, made the same sound, and said with a smile, Daddy is starving. Let's walk around and eat. Abba, the little guy called tenderly, feeling that she would never be able to live without her father in her life. Going to the next room, Li Qingming ate with the little guy without taking off the fox ear headband. For him, if he spoke about something, he would definitely do it to the end. Dad, you eat this meatball. Good. Dad, let me peel the shrimp for you. Thank you. Wow. Dad, I'll serve you some rice. Hey, why is this bowl of rice so much bigger than the one just now? Hee, then I will serve food to Dad every day from now on. Faced with the little guy's attentiveness, Li Qingming also responded every word. No matter how young or old a woman is, the most indispensable thing is to respond. Master Qingming. It happened that at this time, Uncle Fu, who was walking outside the door, paused slightly, and the words that came to his mouth were stopped because of the fox ears on Li Qingming's head. Then he was even more surprised by the fox ears on the little guy's head. With his eyesight, he couldn't tell what was true and what was false, but in just a moment, Fu Bo calmed down all the strange colors in his eyes, and his expression suddenly became enlightened. No wonder Master Qingming gave me that fox ear headband without any explanation this morning. He won't talk too much or ask too many questions about Li Qingming. Not to mention that the little guy is a half-demon, even if Li Qingming raised a big demon at home, he would not come forward to persuade him. As the contemporary successor of Xian Peak, Li Qingming has the confidence to do anything. Fu, Grandpa Fu, the little guy, who was still chewing rice on both sides of his mouth, shouted like this, and suddenly lowered his head to hide in Li Qingming's arms. She didn't know if Grandpa Fu, who was always very good to her, would dislike her appearance, and he was like a hedgehog, trying to hide himself tightly. Li Qingming sighed quietly and looked at Uncle Fu. The latter hesitated for a moment, but also put the fox-eared hairband on his head, and then a real smile appeared on his face. Little guy, look at Fu. What's extra on Grandpa's head? He truly regarded Li Qingming as his nephew and grandson. Now that he has a little one, he feels even more satisfied with having children and grandchildren. Didn't you hear her saying, "Lucky Grandpa," every time? Listening to his voice that was no different from before, the little guy stuck his head out. The sadness in his eyebrows disappeared completely, leaving only a bright smile. Grandpa Fu, you look good wearing this. Hee, I think so, Uncle Fu replied, and took out a few boxes of pastries from somewhere and put them on the table, just like those old men in the world who take care of their grandchildren. Li Qingming watched this scene silently, feeling inexplicably guilty in his heart. Wearing something like this at such an advanced age really embarrasses my Uncle Fu. Who would have thought that the famous swordsman from Xian Peak more than 100 years ago would actually wear such a pink and tender little object to coax a little baby here? If my former opponents saw it, they wouldn't believe it. But who can say that he wasn't enjoying it? Li Qingming sighed in his heart, one young and one old, all wearing fox ears, accompanying the little one to finish the table of spiritual food. Hiccup. The little guy burped loudly, then rubbed his round belly, still clinging to Li Qingming's arms. How about coming down for a walk? I have no strength. After eating, I should lie in my father's arms. The little guy turned over and was too lazy to move. She was full and still had her father's arms to lie down in. How could she lie down in her arms before? have experienced such happiness. Daddy, we haven't finished the story from last time. Pei Zulu said coquettishly, as if he was gradually becoming more confident from a state of worrying about gains and losses. How could Li Qingming refuse such a parent-child interaction? He hugged her and went to the study room to tell stories. When he heard the story about a family of 3 living happily together, with a family photo hanging on the wall at the end, Pei Zulu opened his eyes wide and couldn't help but ask, Daddy, what's the family pot? What is it? Is it the treasure that puts the whole family in a pot? It's a family portrait, a blessing of blessings, not a Buddha. Li Qingming corrected him first. Pot. Seeing that the little guy looked serious but still didn't read it correctly, Li Qingming gave up the idea for the time being and explained, it means that the whole family takes pictures together neatly or has someone draw a picture. The practice world here does not have the background of the traditional farming era. It also has many technologies that Li Qingming has never seen before. Some supplies from the previous life can also be seen here, but the operation method has been changed. He changed his head and his face. Neatly, the little guy repeated, and then asked, yes, is it only for the whole family? Li Qingming nodded and followed her wishes and said, when your mother comes back, we will take pictures and find an artist to paint. A sound family environment does more good than harm to a child's growth. As a daughter slave and determined to be a good father, Li Qingming would naturally consider this aspect. No matter how bad his relationship with Pei Zinan was, he could not change the fact that they were both Pei Zulu's parents. Draw. The little guy didn't think too much and jumped in Li Qingming's arms, almost kicking his old father to death. Dad, I can also draw. Pei Zulu's eyes almost turned into stars, and then he pinched his 2 little hands together and nodded them, and said coquettishly, I can draw the whole family pot by myself. Li Qingming, who looked slightly pale, endured the discomfort in his abdomen, smiled and agreed, and took out the drawing paper from his previous life and a box of colored pencils. As a father, you may have thought about preparing these things long ago when your child is only a few months old. But when the little guy saw the drawing paper, he turned around and asked, Dad, this paper is too small. Is there a bigger one? Li Qingming was not impatient at all, and changed to a large enough drawing paper, quietly watching her performance. At this time, Pei Zinan's cold and faint voice suddenly sounded again. The drawing paper just now is not too small, why do you need to change it to a larger one? It was just an ordinary question. Li Qingming suddenly felt a sudden feeling in his heart, and he had an extremely bad premonition. The next moment, the little guy's answer confirmed his hunch. Where's the big deal? Pei Zulu shook his body, thinking about where to start, when he subconsciously responded with a bit of a stinker. I want to draw some more wives for my father. The so-called childishness is so innocent that even the inappropriate words spoken in an ignorant manner are extremely cute to outsiders. As for the little guy with his small head, clever and sometimes stupid, everything he said was the most sincere inner thoughts. Ever since she found Li Qingming, she had already thought about doing something for her father. Invite daddy to drink grandma's drink together. One person and half, the relationship will not break up. She wants to share the most delicious food in the world with her father. Replace your father-in-law with a mother-in-law. The more obedient ones, the better ones. In this way, not only will her father have many new wives, but she herself will also have many new ones, which is simply great. She, Pei Zulu, wants to be the most caring little cotton-padded jacket in the world. So when he heard this family photo, the little guy immediately remembered his great dream again. How can a small one be enough? The bigger the drawing paper, the better. After he expressed his feelings, the little guy suddenly felt a thump and realized that his little butt hurt again. He had also imagined the extremely terrifying scene not long after, so frightened that the fox ears that were originally upright were like vegetable seedlings beaten by frost, and the fox tail behind him was dragged to the ground. But, you still have to struggle where you should. Dad, I'm sleepy. Pei Zulu suddenly yawned, rubbed his eyes, and opened his hands to rush toward Li Qingming. Dad, sleep with me. There is nothing wrong with this move, and it can be described as being born out of urgency and intelligence. But if the dignified witch Pei Zinan can be fooled like this, then Li Qingming will not suffer so many losses at her hands. Just a stretch and a grab. The little guy was lifted up and slipped up. He lowered his head and did not struggle at all, but he did not forget to cover up his shame. Dad, please go out for a while. I will follow you. I will tell my mother-in-law about my hair. Being spanked every day can easily damage your family's image in Dad's mind, okay. Li Qingming hesitated to speak. He really couldn't stop this beating, but he had to maintain his image to some extent. He had also praised Heiko before. Pei Zinan, you are also a mother-in-law. Don't you know that it will be uncomfortable to carry the child like this? Regardless of his words or expression, Li Qingming acted like the head of the family at this time. He also walked up and held Pei Zinan's wrist with one hand. Then I tried tugging. Didn't pull. No, you fool, can you give me some face? Li Qingming winked at Pei Zinan, and then tried to pull harder. Still, it didn't move. Even so, the little guy was very moved by seeing it. He thought to himself that Dad is so kind to me, so he said very sensibly, Dad, I don't feel bad. Seeing this, Li Qingming became stubborn. Today he had to let this witch know what it means to be the head of a family. Do you understand what the family throne is? Ha, Pei Zinan sneered, forming a mocking gesture with her narrow and playful expression, and she almost lifted Li Qingming up with one hand. One in each hand, one big and one small, all lifted up. Li Qingming instantly understood what her eyes were saying. He hesitated in his heart, but still didn't let go. Sorry, he really doesn't know how to write the word fear. Just like when the two faced each other in the past, Li Qingming looked at Pei Zinan without blinking. Attempt. Well, try to suppress Pei Zinan's anger with your eyes, and see if I don't stare you to death. Li Qingming was just, bloody, regardless of the consequences. He didn't expect that the enchantress suddenly smiled like spring snow and threw the little guy in her hand forward, just in time for Li Qingming to reach out and catch it. Tisk, tisk, Li Qingming, you are getting more and more stupid. He didn't care about Pei Zinan's cynicism, but was surprised that she let the little guy go so easily. Is it possible that he has changed his gender? Remember that you were also a famous showman in Jojo Palace back then, and you were also good at painting, right? Pei Zinan was half leaning on Li Qingming's favorite recliner, with his beautiful eyes lowered, revealing an extremely laziness. Some experience. Li Qingming responded calmly. In his previous life, he had painted oil paintings and sketches for more than 10 years. He could not be called an artist, but using the painting skills he learned in his previous life, he could shamelessly establish a sect here. 100 words are worth one line. Pei Zinan's eyes flashed, and he spoke commandingly, today is too boring, go and paint a picture to relieve my boredom. Yes, she is still the fool that everyone hates. Li Qingming wanted to reply, you deserve it, but the little fox girl in his arms flashed her starry eyes again. Daddy, are you very good at painting? The tone of admiration and surprise without any compliments immediately made Li Qingming feel that he didn't care about this witch. He said with a smile, I'll draw a picture and you can help Dad see how it goes, okay? Okay. The little guy jumped to the ground in a hurry, and found that he couldn't reach the tabletop, so he moved a small stool over and stood on it to watch. If you don't draw on the table, just sit and watch. Li Qingming took the easel and placed it in the corner of the study, set it up, adjusted the height to a height where the little kid could see it while sitting, and then drew simple outlines with a pencil. The little guy didn't quite understand it at first, but when he saw that the long and short lines gradually changed into what he looked like at this time, and even his facial expressions were exactly the same, he couldn't help but exclaimed, wow. She got closer, looked left and right, and still felt it was amazing. How could she be on the drawing paper? Could it be some kind of magic trick? Are you not looking at yourself in the mirror? Daddy is so annoying. After researching for a long time and finding nothing, Pei Zulu admired it sincerely and did not forget to turn around and ask Pei Zinan, Mommy, come and take a look. When Li Qingming set up the easel, he deliberately faced Pei Zinan, are you worthy of watching me paint? Ha, I only paint for my daughter. Pei Zinan naturally understood this man's plan and was a little unhappy at the moment, what's there to see? It's just a painting. Do you want her to bow her head first? Absolutely impossible. Okay. Pei Zulu blinked, focusing entirely on the painting. Dad, please paint again, and include you too. Li Qingming nodded, slid the pen tip, and a miniature version of him appeared next to the little fox girl on the paper. Wow. This time the little guy opened his mouth wide again and his voice was long and drawn out. She had never seen such miraculous painting skills. There was only endless admiration in her heart. Dad, your wife is so boring. Auntie, come here and take a look. Pei Zulu turned around and called again. She really wanted Pei Zinan to see how good her father was at painting. Boring. Pei Zinan still responded coldly, but looked here one more time, then closed his eyes and fell asleep. Seeing that she was really not interested, Pei Zulu stopped caring about her, took Li Qingming's free big hand, shook it and said, Daddy, Daddy, paint again and again. Draw another auntie, so I can. There are also family pots. Okay. Li Qingming hesitated for a while, then picked up the brush and responded to the little guy's request. With just a few strokes, he outlined Pei Zinan's outline, and then sculpted the bones and flesh. Then there were bursts of exclamations from Pei Zulu. Daddy, Daddy, can you draw lucky butterflies, the lucky butterflies that fly in midair? Pei Zulu couldn't help but ask after being attracted by the butterflies that happened to fly by outside. Li Qingming was worried that he was not showing off enough, so he took off the previous piece of drawing paper and placed it on the table, then went out with the easel. After the two left, Pei Zinan finally got up. Li Qingming's painting skills were well known, but she didn't have high expectations. After all, this came from the mouths of women who admired Li Qingming, so how credible could it be? But listening to the little guy's exclamations, Pei Zinan felt really itchy in his heart, but he refused to lose face. At this moment, she was the only one left in the room, and she was finally able to take a few glances. I want to see what you, Li Qingming, are capable of. Pei Zinan murmured softly. When he saw himself in the drawing paper on the table, he couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Except for the lack of color embellishment, she is lifelike in the painting, and even her faint evil spirit is drawn out. At this moment, the little guy who was returning saw this scene by the door and shouted directly, Daddy, Daddy, Grandma is peeking at your painting. Pei Zulu was so excited that he raised his chin and said to Pei Zinan, I said I wouldn't look, but I caught him peeking. Mom, you are so embarrassed. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.